Chapter 254. What's your name? Which newspaper are you from? My name is George Nord. Linda. I'm a reporter for Hollywood Online. George Rosen quickly made up a fake name for himself halfway through. Eric didn't realize that George Rosen was lying. He nodded and asked, "You just said that it was a very stupid choice to release Scary Island on November 1st. What's your reason?" George Rosen replied confidently, "It's very simple. Although November 1st is Halloween, and many horror movies will be released during this period, it's actually not a popular period. In fact, it's not even a good period. The box office for these few weeks is no different from the movie off-season. Since Disney and Firefly have high hopes for this movie, it is stupid to release it on November 1st. Or, do you not have much confidence in island horror? Is that why you put it on such a schedule that is like a graveyard for cannon fodder?" After listening to George Rosen's words, Eric couldn't help but take a few more glances at him. This middle-aged paparazzi was much better than those who only knew how to pry into the privacy of celebrities. Since you can speak so eloquently, then you should also know that there are always a few movies in the top 10 box office rankings every year. Their release dates are neither during the summer nor during the Christmas season, but they still manage to squeeze into the rankings based on their own quality. Mr. Williams, I understand what you're saying. Just like Leap into Childhood Innocence released a few weeks ago, TriStar Studios originally didn't have high hopes for this movie, so they released it in October, which is an unpopular period. However, this box office dark horse with only a few million yuan cost has now taken nearly $60 million in box office, and it may even become a competitor of Scary Island. However, Mr. Williams, you didn't answer my question. The dark horse movies you mentioned were released in the off-season because they weren't popular in advance. However, Scary Island is obviously a movie that Disney and Firefly have high hopes for, and it even won the Silver Lion at the Venice Film Festival. Eric smiled slightly and said confidently, "I've just answered you. As long as the quality of the movie is good, sometimes it can ignore the schedule." Ignore the schedule? George Rosen's eyes widened in surprise, and some of the more professional reporters in the crowd also showed a look of surprise. Eric was too arrogant to say such a thing. In the whole of Hollywood, no director or producer dared to say such a thing with confidence. Most of them were racking their brains to release their movies during the summer or the new year, because everyone knew that a high-quality movie schedule meant higher box office revenue. However, Eric not only did the opposite, but he also arrogantly shouted the slogan of ignoring the schedule. Many paparazzi were keenly aware that this would be a very explosive topic. They couldn't help but squeeze forward, and at the same time, try harder to reach the tape recorder in their hands in front of Eric. George Rosen also knew that this would be a very controversial topic. He even had a preliminary draft in his mind. He believed that many people would see Eric Williams' arrogant side tomorrow. If Scary Island didn't achieve unexpected results, Eric Williams would be disgraced, and it would even have a great impact on the box office of his next few movies during the new year. However, although he thought so, George Rosen still put the tape recorder closer to Eric and asked innocently, "Mr. Williams, did you just say that Scary Island can completely ignore the schedule and get a high box office?" Eric shrugged and nodded. "Since I released the movie on November 1st, I must have such confidence in my heart." The group of reporters outside the cordon once again burst into a faint uproar. After Eric finished speaking, he ignored the crowd and pulled Virginia into the theater. "Hey, Mr. Williams, can you explain in detail?" "Mr. Williams, why do you have so much confidence in this movie?" "Mr. Williams." Amidst the crazy shouts of the reporters behind, Eric took Virginia up the steps of the theater without looking back. Because the premiere would not start until 7 o'clock, the two did not go directly to the screening hall. Instead, they were guided by the staff to the prepared lounge, where the celebrity guests who came to support the movie were waiting. Walking in the VIP passageway, Virginia asked softly, "Eric, isn't it inappropriate for you to say something like that just now? Even you have no confidence in me?" Eric asked with a smile. Virginia quickly shook her head. "No, of course I have confidence in you, but anything can go wrong. What if? What if? Then you will definitely be laughed at." Eric squeezed the girl's hand to comfort her. Don't worry, there's no what if. Virginia opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but Eric pulled her into the lounge. After greeting the many stars who came to support the movie, Disney's CEO Michael Eisner also arrived about 10 minutes later. Eric, I heard what you said on the red carpet, Michael Eisner said to Eric as soon as they met. Eric raised his eyebrows. Mr. Eisner, do you also think my words are very inappropriate? Michael Eisner shook his head. I just think it's too risky for you to say that. In fact, even I am very curious. Why do you insist on releasing this movie on November 1st? Now that I have done as you said, you should tell me the reason. Let's talk over there. Eric pointed to a sofa against the wall not far away. Michael Eisner nodded and followed Eric over. Although the people in the lounge wanted to strike up a conversation with Eric and Michael Eisner, they were very sensible and did not come over when they saw that the two had something to discuss. Actually, I already had this idea a long time ago, probably before Dark War was released. Eric glanced at Michael Eisner and said, at that time, I thought since there will be 5 movies related to me at the end of this year, why not create a beautiful Grand Slam miracle during this schedule? Grand Slam miracle? Michael Eisner repeated the 2 key words in Eric's words, but he did not understand what the word Grand Slam had to do with movies. It was not a football game. Eric did not keep him in suspense and quickly said, Mr. Eisner, Scary Island will be released on November 1st. After we put in a lot of effort to promote it, it will definitely be the box office champion for 2 weeks. Next, Home Alone 2 will be released on November 17th. Last year, this movie was the box office champion for 10 weeks. I have seen the movies released at the same time, and only Lethal Weapon 2 and Back to the Future 2 can compete with Home Alone 2. However, the audience of those 2 movies is obviously not comparable to the popularity of Home Alone 2. Even if the box office of this sequel will be lower, it will definitely be no problem for it to be the box office champion for 5 weeks. Finally, on Christmas Day, Sleepless in Seattle continued to be the weekly box office champion. I've seen that there aren't any blockbusters this Christmas, so I can still sit as the weekly box office champion. As long as there aren't any strong movies, then maybe I can maintain this status until February. Moreover, as long as we promote this gimmick, the movies in this relay race will receive more attention at the same time. This will also play a role in promoting the box office of these movies. Hearing Eric's plan, Michael Eisner was extremely shocked. The young man beside him was obviously going to occupy the whole New Year's box office. A movie that was the box office champion could take at least 30% of the box office of the week, plus the box office of the movies that were not at the top. This number would at least rise to 40%. According to the total box office of $600 million at the end of the year, these movies would take a total box office of $240 million, which did not seem to be a lot. It was not even the total box office of Home Alone last year. But don't forget, after the new year, these movies still had at least 1 to 3 months of box office harvesting, and the total box office would definitely not be less than $240 million. On average, each of the 5 movies would have a box office of at least $100 million. If this was the case, Firefly would take at least 5 of the top 10 box office rankings this year. This was obviously a humiliation for the 7 major movie companies. Even if Disney was the winner in this matter, Michael Eisner didn't feel any excitement when he thought about it. Maybe it's time to do something. Michael Eisner inexplicably had such a thought in his mind. Glancing at the young man beside him who was still full of ambition, Michael Eisner pursed his lips, patted Eric's shoulder, and said a few words of encouragement, then got up and left. Eric sat on the sofa for a while, because he seemed to have seen something different in Michael Eisner's eyes, but he did not understand what it was. After telling Michael Eisner his ambitious plan, Eric himself was a little excited, so he did not analyze the meaning in Michael Eisner's eyes in detail. Chapter 255. The premiere started at 7 o'clock sharp. After some interaction with the fans, Island Horror also began its official reaction. It still started with Virginia's somewhat hoarse storytelling voice. As the plot moved forward step by step, the fog gradually cleared. When Grace, played by Virginia, pushed open the door that revealed all the truth. Eric heard a clear, wow sound in the theater. The subtitles slowly rose, and after the lights came on, there were a few drum-like applause in the theater. These scattered applause were like a flame that ignited a haystack. In less than 5 seconds, the sound of rain hitting everything sounded, and it lasted for more than a minute. This is definitely one of the best horror stories I have seen in years. Although the plot is simple and clear, and there are no fancy Hollywood special effects, the creepy atmosphere during the movie has always shrouded my heart. Eric Williams has conquered a completely different group of fans with Home Alone, Pretty Woman, and Dark War, and he has extended his evil hand to the group of fans who love horror movies. This is an incredible thing. An awe-inspiring ending that allows one to temporarily escape from the real world. After enjoying the heartbeat for more than an hour, the unexpected ending seems to suddenly pull one back to the naked reality, making one shudder. This is a very great movie. In such an era where we can only pile up horror with a lot of blood and disgusting special effects, Island Horror is undoubtedly a very smart horror movie. It doesn't use those usual methods, but it still makes people shudder and scream. A thriller about the arrival of the supernatural. He relies on the creepy tension of the plot instead of blood and violence. Virginia Madsen's performance also makes people's eyes light up. This beautiful vase who made her debut with David Fincher's Dune seems to finally know her position in Hollywood after several years of exploration. I hope she can continue to bring us better movies. Well, okay, I admit that it is not easy to surpass Island Horror, so as long as she can bring us the same good movie, I believe the audience will be satisfied. Immersed in nervousness and an ominous premonition, it's almost an old trick in horror movies. However, there were no strange masked killers and kitchen knives in this movie, nor were there any bloody and cruel conflicts. No one knew what had happened, but everyone wanted to know what had happened. In the end, when the door was pushed open, it finally made us, who were already drenched in cold sweat, realize what had happened. The day after the premiere, the New York Post, Newsweek, the New York Times, Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, the Chicago Tribune, and many other newspapers published positive reviews of the film. Many people found that the word used the most in these reviews was creepy. The audience who saw these reviews, especially the horror fans, were all looking forward to November 1st. At the same time, Eric's words on the red carpet naturally caused a storm. The next day, Hollywood Online published George Rosen's draft that he had rushed out overnight. Perhaps, after the success of several movies, Eric Williams has become so arrogant that he has forgotten the fact that he is just a human being and not a god. He actually boasted in front of many fans that Island Horror was so good that it could ignore any schedule restrictions. Neither Steven Spielberg nor George Lucas dared to say such arrogant words. Yet, it came from the mouth of a young man who was not even 20 years old. It was an act of not knowing the immensity of heaven and earth. Moreover, although the author was not able to watch the movie in person, according to insiders who watched the movie on the spot, Island Horror was far from being as good as Eric said. It was even far from the quality of Eric's previous movies. Not only was the setting rough and simple, but it was also deliberately mystifying from beginning to end. The plot of the whole movie seemed to be crawling slowly. After more than an hour of delay, although the ending was a little unexpected, for the sleepy audience, there was no surprise. I really want Mr. Eric Williams to personally come out and analyze it in detail. What right does such an extremely slow movie have to say that it can ignore schedules? Although many newspapers were concerned about Disney's influence and did not blatantly criticize and smear Island Horror like the tabloids such as Hollywood Online, they were extremely sarcastic about Eric's ignoring schedules on the red carpet. In just 2 or 3 days, ignoring schedules had become a popular joke. The 3 major TV stations that were very unhappy with Eric because of Friends frequently used this topic to satirize him. In a daytime talk show on NBC, a middle-aged host in his 40s named Bonnie Godwin didn't sit in front of his desk and talk like he usually did. Instead, he let the audience wait for a few seconds before he slowly floated to his seat with a steel wire dangling from his body. There was also a comical pair of pocket-sized angel wings tied to his back. And when the guest asked for the reason, he used his awakened ability to ignore gravity to satirize Eric's so-called ignoring schedules theory. Although the outside world was in an uproar, and even Jeffrey persuaded Eric to clarify in the end, Eric turned a deaf ear. On Wednesday, November 1st, Island Horror was officially released in 1,700 theaters. Under everyone's attention, the next day, the first-day box office of Island Horror was only 1 million yuan. The media suddenly gloated. Since the movie written by Eric Williams could not ignore working days, then it was definitely impossible to ignore schedules. But then, after a rough estimate, after taking another US $3.9 million box office on Thursday, Shock Island earned US $6.3 million, US $7.1 million and US $6.4 million on Friday, Saturday and Sunday respectively. And after the final detailed statistics, the total box office for the first 5 days reached 19 million yuan. All the individuals and media who questioned it immediately shut their mouths. A first-week box office of more than 27 million yuan, even in any popular period, was a very bright result. Chapter 256. It was already nighttime. In a densely populated residential area in the northwest of Santa Monica, 3 tall and sexy girls walked out of a supermarket each with a plastic bag in their hands, attracting the attention of the opposite sex around them. Although there were many Hollywood stars living in this area, and there was no shortage of beautiful women on the streets, it was not common to see 3 beautiful girls with off-the-charts gathering together. The girl with black hair and fair skin walking on the far left skillfully opened a pack of cigarettes in the plastic bag with one hand, completely ignoring the surprised looks of the passers-by. She took out a cigarette and lit it at the corner of her mouth, then asked the Latino girl in the middle, "Penny, what did that guy say to you in the supermarket just now?" The Latino girl took out a small business card from her pocket and showed it to the 2 girls. She smiled and said, "He said that he was a talent scout from an agency. He thinks that I look like the Spanish actress Penelope Cruz and wants to invite me to audition for their company." The other 2 girls were slightly stunned for a moment, then they laughed heartily. The 3 girls were none other than the 3 female leads that Eric had chosen for the Thunderbolt Girls. However, as the Thunderbolt Girls was still in the early stages of preparation, no information was revealed to the public. That was why the talent scout that Penelope mentioned had made such a mistake. After a few laughs, Charlize Theron on the other side asked, "How did you answer him?" "I pretended that I didn't speak English. He pestered me for a while. Then he left with a business card and left," Penelope Cruz said and threw the business card into the trash can. Although she still had a very obvious accent, she spoke English very fluently. After another chuckle, Kate Beckinsale took a few puffs of the cigarette in her hand and suddenly complained, "There are still 2 months to go. If I knew that the training was so painful, I wouldn't have come." When Penelope Cruz and Charlize Theron heard this, they laughed silently. Clearly, this wasn't the first time they had heard Kate Beckinsale's habitual complaint. Kate Beckinsale was the one who was arranged by Eric to have the most intense training. Penelope and Charlize both learned dance from a young age, so they basically did not have any difficulty in completing the various movements. Their daily training was just like the dance class. Kate Beckinsale was different. She had only attended a few ballet classes when she was young, and now her body was no different from an ordinary person. In the first few days, she even cried because of the pain from the simple leg press training, but in the end, she persevered. When Beckinsale finished her cigarette, the 3 girls had already arrived at their residence. This was a small independent courtyard that Michelle Simmons had arranged for them. It was only half an hour's walk from the place where they participated in the training every day. Beckinsale threw the cigarette, but into the trash can next to her, feeling a little unsatisfied. It seemed that she wanted to take out another one, but after looking at the courtyard door not far away, she did not do it in the end. The other 2 girls only glanced at her actions and didn't say a word. They would occasionally smoke a cigarette or 2, but definitely not as frequently as Beckinsale. However, the 2 girls didn't have any intention of stopping her. Although Michelle Simmons had asked them to get along in private, it didn't mean that they would really confide in each other. At the end of the day, they were still competitors. Charlize Theron took out the key to open the door, and the three girls walked into the living room together. Beckinsale threw the plastic bag on the coffee table and lazily leaned on the sofa. She picked up the remote control and turned on the TV. After the other two girls put down the plastic bag, they went into their rooms to change into more casual clothes. Penelope Cruz had just taken off her coat when she heard Beckinsale shout from the living room, "Penny, Charlie, come out and watch. It's the live broadcast of the premiere of Jurassic Park." Penelope originally planned to ignore it, but when she heard Jurassic Park, she thought of another name and immediately walked out of the bedroom. At the same time, Charlize Theron also walked out. At this time, the TV just happened to broadcast the scene of the disruptive reporter asking a question. "Mr. Williams, regarding the recent defamation of Magnificent Peak, starring Mr. Stallone by his competitor, what do you think?" Seeing the brief silence on the TV screen, Charlize Theron laughed out loud. She pulled a pillow next to her and squeezed it a few times. She gloated and said, "Ha, this guy is in trouble now." In the past few days, Charlize Theron had also heard about the defamation of Magnificent Peak. As a proud girl, Charlize Theron still remembered the scene of her being completely ignored that day. Now that she saw Eric being humiliated, it was really a pleasant thing to think about. Penelope Cruz's eyes were burning with ambition. She looked at the young man on the screen as if she didn't hear Charlize Theron's words at all. Kate Beckinsale looked at Charlize Theron's reaction in surprise. However, Eric then responded calmly and easily resolved the crisis. The audience even applauded. Charlize Theron suddenly felt a little depressed. Penelope Cruz's eyes still didn't leave the TV screen. She leaned over and asked, "Charlie, haven't you seen Eric Williams? What do you think of him?" "A very hateful guy." Charlize Theron deliberated for a moment before saying this. After the female reporter on the TV asked about the box office expectations of Jurassic Park, she couldn't help but prick up her ears again. The guy on the TV seemed to want to avoid this question, but the female reporter was relentless. "However, I think everyone is more curious. Since Mr. Williams can break the norm and arrange 3,000 screens for this movie, then what is your box office expectation in your mind?" Then, she saw Eric Williams raise the microphone to his mouth. After a brief hesitation, he said, "If you really want to know, then my global box office expectation for Jurassic Park is $1 billion USD. Wow. Even sitting in front of the TV, the three girls could still hear the uproar at the premiere. There were some chaotic scenes. The reporters who were sitting quietly in the audience waiting for an opportunity to ask questions could no longer hold it in. They took the initiative to stand up and ask questions loudly. Charlize Theron and Kate Beckinsale were also shocked when they heard the number Eric spit out. $1 billion USD. No movie in Hollywood history had ever reached this box office number. However, Penelope Cruz next to them was even more surprised. 1 million. How can it be only 1 million? How can it be? Charlize Theron was stunned. Before she could react, Kate Beckinsale rolled her eyes at Penelope Cruz. "Penny, it's 1 billion USD, not 1 million. In English, only the first word of the two measurement words, million and billion, was different. Their pronunciation was also very similar. It was no wonder that Penelope Cruz misunderstood. Of course, this was mainly because she had never thought of the box office of a movie as $1 billion at the box office. Penelope realized that she had misheard. She was a little embarrassed, but then she realized that it should be 1 billion USD. Her delicate chin suddenly had a tendency to drop. Wow, 1 billion USD. Because of Eric's answer, the premiere's Q&A session could no longer continue. The several main creators of Jurassic Park hurriedly answered a few more questions and left the stage. Then the TV began to play the trailer of Jurassic Park. According to Eric's original idea, the 2-minute trailer of Jurassic Park did not have a complete picture of a giant dinosaur. However, the changes in the expressions of the protagonists in the trailer and the final roar of the giant beast that made people tremble still made people have a strong expectation for this movie. After the trailer was played, Kate Beckinsale couldn't wait to say, "Penny, Charlie, how about we go to the midnight screening tomorrow night?" Charlize Theron did not look interested at all. Didn't that guy say not to enter the cinema just for publicity? So you should go take a look first. If you think it's good, I'll consider whether to take a look or not. Penelope waited for Charlize to finish speaking before saying, Kate, let's go together. Okay. Kate Beckinsale nodded immediately. Charlize Theron said unhappily, Hey, didn't you two watch the trailer just now? It said it's Jurassic Park, but there's not even a shadow of a dinosaur. I'm sure you'll be disappointed when you see it. It's better not to go. Kate Beckinsale and Penelope Cruz looked at each other. Beckinsale then said, Charlie, why do I feel like you're full of resentment towards Mr. Williams? Penelope Cruz also nodded in agreement. Yes, like a resentful woman. Hey, what happened when you two met last time? Resentful woman. Charlize Theron dragged out her voice and laughed. However, she seemed to have noticed something. Her eyes were a little flustered. She threw away the pillow in her hand and stood up. I'm not going to talk to you guys. I'm going to take a shower and sleep. Penelope Cruz looked at Charlize Theron's back with a teasing tone. Charlie, it's only 7:30. Kate Beckinsale also said, Then should we buy your tickets tomorrow? It's up to you. Just buy the tickets and give them to the tramp. I'm definitely not going. Penelope laughed a few times and continued, Then we'll buy a ticket for the tramp. You'll be responsible for the popcorn money. Charlize's crazy roar sounded in the bathroom. You two shut up. Haha. While the girls were fooling around, the movie had already started playing on the stage at the Chinese Grand Theater in Hollywood. As soon as Eric walked backstage, he was surrounded by a group of people. Charlie West, who was in charge of organizing the premiere, looked at Eric's gloomy face and explained in a nervous tone. Mr. Williams, I've already asked someone to investigate. That reporter just now is. Eric waved his hand. Forget it, I don't care about this. Charlie West immediately shut his mouth. Jerry Bruckheimer saw that no one else dared to speak, so he had to say, Eric, what should we do next? Eric didn't answer Jerry's words. He silently took a bottle of water from the staff and drank a few mouthfuls. He said to the people around him, Who's the person in charge of Carlock Pictures now? Hearing Eric's words, everyone present knew that Eric was completely pissed off this time. If Carlock Pictures was just doing some small tricks in private and wanted to hitch a ride on Jurassic Park, it wouldn't be a big deal. However, directly stirring up trouble at the premiere of Jurassic Park had already touched the bottom line that Firefly could tolerate. Seeing Alan immediately walk nearby and start to make a phone call after hearing Eric's words, Jerry Bruckheimer couldn't help but whisper, Eric, now is not the time to react too strongly. It's too easy to give people a handle. I know, don't worry. Eric nodded. Everyone went to a lounge and sat down, waiting for the curtain call after the end of the movie. After a while, Alan came in with a mobile phone. He covered the microphone and whispered to Eric. Eric, Carlock is now in charge of Mario Kasser. He was one of the two founders of the company. He's online now. Do you want to? Eric shook his head and said indifferently. Tell him that this matter is over. I don't want to see such messy news in any media. Otherwise, I'll erase the name of Carlock from Hollywood. I'm very angry today. I'm not in the mood to joke with people. Alan nodded and walked out again with the mobile phone. Eric frowned and exhaled. If it weren't for the guy who stirred up the situation just now, he would never easily reveal his box office expectations for Jurassic Park. Hollywood's previous highest-grossing movies in the world were within $800 million. Throwing out the figure of $1 billion would definitely cause a wave in the media. Moreover, these discussions might not necessarily bring good results. If the box office of Jurassic Park didn't reach an amazing level in the first week, then the wind was likely to change at any time. However, because of the reporter who stirred up the situation, Eric had to come up with an even more explosive news to suppress the topic caused by the reporter as much as possible. Otherwise, even if no one pushed for it, there would be a lot of arguments in tomorrow's newspapers such as explanation is concealment. Concealment is the truth. Firefly would probably not be able to get rid of the black pot of Bear Peak of the Mountain. The words that Eric had just told Alan to pass on to the person in charge of Carlock were not completely false threats. Carlock Pictures was an independent production company that relied entirely on external financing to produce movies. It didn't even have its own distribution channels. If Eric really wanted to destroy this film company, it wouldn't be difficult. As long as there was a rumor that Firefly would snipe any film produced by Carlock, then with the box office power of Firefly's movies in recent years, considering the risk of investment, those German investors would definitely not easily invest in this film company's movies. Carlock was not the only film company that Hollywood could invest in. Without external financing, it was inevitable that Carlock would close down a few films. Unfortunately, Eric couldn't do this, at least not for the time being. As Jerry Bruckheimer had just reminded him, if Firefly made too much of a counterattack now, it would definitely give them a handle. A few minutes later, Alan walked back to the lounge again. Eric, Mario Kasser firmly denied that Carlock Pictures was involved in today's incident. However, listening to his tone, he obviously admitted defeat. I don't think this kind of thing will happen again in the future. That's it, Eric nodded, put this matter aside, and asked about the London premiere. Chapter 257. Mr. Jaffe, since a ghost movie like Scary Island has been successful, I think a romance movie with a ghost as the main character must be very promising. Before the bespectacled middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s could finish, the man he addressed as Mr. Jaffe interrupted him. Okay, Bruce, I know you've been promoting your script, but I'm really not interested in it. I've been preparing for another movie recently. The others standing around the table echoed. Bruce, forget it. Don't you think a romance movie with a ghost as the main character looks ridiculous? Moreover, it's a tragedy. Many memorable stories are tragedies, Bruce retorted. What's the use of having a memorable story? A man with brown curly hair said. I've heard about your script too. It requires a lot of special effects, and the investment will not be less than $20 million. This is already considered an above-average investment. It's a big risk for the producers. Bruce, since you're interested in ghosts or supernatural phenomena, you should put more effort into writing more horror scripts, like Scary Island, instead of wasting your time on ghost romance movies. When Eric walked closer, he happened to hear the brown-haired man's words. His heart suddenly skipped a beat. Ghost romance movie, Bruce. With just these two keywords, Eric was already 70% sure. Wasn't the screenwriter of the tear-jerking Ghost, in his previous life, called Bruce Joey Robin? Moreover, if he hadn't appeared, the movie might have already started production. Although the director of Scary Island was Jonathan Demme, there was no doubt that Eric was the most eye-catching person at this party. Therefore, when he approached the long buffet table, the group of people who were chatting immediately surrounded him and enthusiastically introduced themselves. Eric took the business cards handed over by these people and politely distributed his own business cards. Then, he pretended to ask casually, I seem to have heard words like ghost just now. What are you guys talking about? The crowd did not know what topic to talk about to get closer to Eric. When they heard him take the initiative to ask, the middle-aged man who was addressed as Mr. Jaffe immediately said, It's a script about a murdered bank employee who turns into a ghost to protect his girlfriend from evil people. Eric recalled that the middle-aged man named Charles Jaffe had just introduced himself. He seemed to be a vice president of Paramount. He thought that the other party must have been taught by Barry Diller's high-concept movies back then. He summarized the plot of Ghost in one sentence. At the same time, Eric was even more certain of his guess. The middle-aged man with glasses who was squeezed to the periphery of the crowd must be the screenwriter of Ghost, Bruce Joey Robin. Although after entering Hollywood, Eric repeatedly combed and recalled the famous films of the past few years, trying to get the shooting rights of some films as much as possible. However, after some investigation, he found that many film rights had already been obtained by major film companies, and some of them could not be found. Ghost was one of the scripts that could not be found. Before this movie, Bruce Joey Robin had no fame in Hollywood. After some inquiries, Eric could not even find him. In the end, Eric could only decide to take it one step at a time. Because Ghost was released in the summer of 1990, according to the general production process of movies in the parallel universe, this film should have been prepared this year. The script must have appeared earlier. Perhaps it had appeared before his time travel, so it was impossible for Eric to copy it and use it directly. Eric did not immediately show any interest in the script. He inadvertently glanced at Bruce Joey Robin, and then focused on chatting with the group of people around him. Don't be fooled by the enthusiasm of the executives of these big companies or famous producers. Based on his experience in producing movies, if he dared to show interest in the script of Ghost on the spot, these people would definitely immediately turn hostile and join the ranks of snatching the script. After chatting for a while, Eric separated from these people. During the whole process, he did not have any communication with Bruce Joey Robin. Since Bruce Joey Robin had appeared, it would be much easier to find him later. However, many things were always unexpected. As soon as he walked away, Bruce Joey Robin caught up with him in a few steps. Mr. Williams. Behind Eric, the red-haired middle-aged man who had just dealt a blow to Bruce Joey Robin saw his actions and said to Charles Jaffe with a smile, "It seems that Bruce is still unwilling to give up." He went to pester Williams again. Charles Jaffe looked deeply at the back of the middle-aged man who had caught up with Eric and said, "Brian, do you think Williams will like that script?" Who knows, but with Eric Williams' taste, if he likes that script. The red-haired middle-aged man named Brian suddenly stopped. He and Charles Jaffe looked at each other, and then they separated as if nothing had happened. The two of them were only acquaintances, and Charles Jaffe was the vice president of Paramount, while Brian was working in Warner. If Eric confirmed the potential of the script and competed, the two of them would definitely be rivals. Hearing the conversation between Charles and Brian, the people around them all looked in Eric's direction. Eric was also having a headache. Bruce Joey Robin had already begun to narrate the plot of Ghost. What could he do now? Pretend not to care and ignore it? After the party, he could get people to come to him enthusiastically. Bruce Joey Robin was not a fool. It would be even more troublesome. Viciously criticize the script? Then there would probably be no chance of cooperation. The first two methods could not be used, and if he expressed interest in the script on the spot, with this thought, Eric could not help but look around. Many people had already turned their attention to them, especially those who had just chatted with them. These people were all shrewd people. As long as he dared to reveal his inner thoughts, the firefly could only be regarded as a weak hyena among a group of wolves, tigers, and leopards eyeing him covetously. Chapter 258. Sam and Molly were a couple living in Manhattan's Soho district. Sam was a bank manager and Molly was an artist. They were about to get married, but Sam's colleague and friend, Carl, was discovered by Sam by accident because he was using a bank account to launder money. Faced with the pursuit of the huge amount of money, Carl had no choice but to take the risk and hire someone to steal Sam's wallet. But because of an accident, the person Carl hired accidentally killed Sam. The story began here. After Sam died, his soul didn't choose to go to heaven directly because he saw his girlfriend, Molly, hugging his body in pain. Instead, he chose to stay in the human world. Originally, Sam floated around Molly aimlessly, hoping that Molly would notice him again. But because of this, Sam's soul discovered the truth of his accidental death. It turned out that it was all Carl's doing, and Carl even tried to hurt Molly. Angry and fearful, Sam found a medium who could communicate with him and tried to get her to help inform Molly of the truth. However, Molly treated him as a liar. Carl became more and more nervous because he couldn't get the bank password. In the end, he decided to use extreme means. Sam also learned the ability to control objects from a soul in the subway, and finally made Molly believe in his existence. In the end, Molly, Carl, and Sam's souls clashed. Carl was accidentally hit in the heart by a falling glass and died. His soul was dragged to hell by the Grim Reaper. After Sam said goodbye to Molly and Odim, his wish was fulfilled. He slowly walked through the gate of heaven. Mr. Williams, what do you think of this story? Bruce Joey Robin had noticed that Eric seemed to be a little absent-minded from the beginning, so he only told the story briefly. He didn't have much hope in his heart. He asked this last question because he was waiting for Eric to give a negative answer, and then tactfully leave. Hearing that Bruce Joey Robin had finished, Eric hurriedly retracted his attention. Mr. Robin, it seems like Charles and the rest don't think highly of this story? Eric didn't express his opinion on the story, and instead asked a question in return. When Bruce heard Eric's words, he thought that he was rejecting him like the others. He said with a look of disappointment, "Then sorry to disturb you, Mr. Williams." Just as he was about to leave, Eric hurriedly called out to him, "Mr. Robin, actually, I think this idea is pretty good." Brosnan immediately stopped in his tracks and turned around in surprise to confirm, "Mr. Williams, did I hear wrongly?" "Of course not," Eric said with a smile. "I think your idea is good. However, I just listened to the outline of the story, and I didn't find any highlights. Do you have a complete script?" "Of course, Mr. Williams, Bruce Joey Robin eagerly rubbed his hands. He had joined the party with a friend, so it was impossible for him to bring a script. But it wasn't easy to meet someone he was interested in, and the other party was the most popular young director in Hollywood. Of course, Brosnan wanted to seize this opportunity. "Mr. Williams, why don't I go back and get the script now?" Eric shook his head and said, "There's no need to rush. It's already very late." After that, he took out a business card and handed it to Brosnan. "Tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning, bring the script to me at the Firefly headquarters. We'll talk about it in detail then." Brosnan excitedly put away the business card. "Mr. Williams, I'll be there on time." Eric didn't say anything more. He nodded, glanced at the guests around him who were already eager to try, and left as if nothing had happened. He knew that since he had paid attention to this matter, the people who had been watching his movements at the party would definitely be interested in the script in Bruce Joey Robin's hands again. However, Eric wasn't worried. Since everything had changed, he was the only one who could recreate the original Ghost in its entirety. The butterfly effect was sometimes very powerful. As long as there was a slight change, everything would no longer be able to follow the original trajectory. Then, even if the original director took over Ghost, because of different ideas at different times and places, it would be impossible to produce the original Ghost in Eric's memory. Thinking of this, Eric didn't think too much about this matter. Instead, he pulled Virginia to the dance floor. "Eric, what are you thinking about?" On the dance floor, Virginia, who was leaning on Eric, looked up and asked. Eric glanced at Bruce Joey Robin, who was being hit on from time to time, and said, "I've taken a fancy to a script. But since it's something that I've taken a fancy to, others must be very interested in it too. Now there are probably many people who want to snatch it." Virginia followed Eric's gaze. "It's that person. I just saw you talking to him for a while. Since you've taken a fancy to it, why don't you buy it immediately?" "Now. Overnight?" Eric smiled softly and said to Virginia, "No one is stupid. If I act too eagerly, the person who owns the script will probably not be in a hurry to sell it. In addition, other film companies will come to snatch it. In the end, if we want to get it, the price will be even higher." Virginia hugged Eric's waist tightly and rubbed her face against him. "I don't quite understand. It seems that I'm an idiot." Eric smiled and whispered to Virginia, "It's okay. I like stupid women. It's not good for a woman to be too smart, so it's best to be a little stupid." Virginia protested and hammered Eric. Then she looked up, blinked her big eyes, and asked in a soft voice, "Eric, tonight?" Eric shook his head helplessly. "Paparazzi follow you wherever you go now. Do you think I dare to go to your place?" Virginia heard Eric's words and felt a little helpless. Since the release of Shock Island, Virginia not only received the long-awaited fame and jumped from a third-rate actress to an A-list star, but her personal life also received strong attention from many tabloids. Eric knew that those people's target was not only Virginia, but also himself. Whenever he thought of the night of the negotiation with Murdoch, the old man said that a reporter from the New York Post had secretly followed him for several months. Eric felt uncomfortable. To be honest, the matter hadn't been resolved yet, and Eric wasn't naive enough to ask Murdoch for the photos afterward. Even a fool would know that Murdoch wouldn't give him the photos without a backup. Since that was the case, he didn't do anything unnecessary. However, since that incident, Eric had become more cautious. Although he did not care about being exposed by the media, he had to care about what Jennifer Aniston thought. Because if his scandals with other actresses repeatedly appeared in the newspapers, Jennifer Aniston would not be able to pretend to be an ostrich. In the end, she would be forced to break up with him. Although he could not go to Virginia's place, going to Jennifer Aniston's place was not a problem. After all, she was his official girlfriend. After opening the bedroom door and walking into the living room, Eric heard a light sound in the kitchen. Morning. Nicole, who was making breakfast, heard the sound and turned to greet Eric. Morning. Eric nodded and smelled the food in the air. He asked, "Is there a portion for me?" Nicole rolled her eyes at him. "What do you think?" "Of course there is," Eric said as he walked up and looked into the small soup pot in front of Nicole. Nicole felt Eric approaching her and said helplessly, "You were so busy yesterday. Haven't you had enough? Did you come here to eavesdrop?" Nicole blushed and denied. "Do I need to eavesdrop? You were so loud. If it weren't for the sound insulation of the villa, the neighbors would have called the police." "What about you?" Eric asked in a wicked tone. "What do you two have to do with me?" Nicole replied randomly. Eric stopped teasing her and said, "Okay, I'll go wake Jenny up. Hurry up and make breakfast." Bastard. Looking at Eric's back as he left, Nicole cursed softly. After breakfast, Eric left the apartment that Jennifer Aniston and Nicole shared. Before he entered the office building, Bruce Joey Robin, who was waiting outside, came up to him. "Mr. Robin, didn't we agree to meet at 9? Eric looked at his watch. Bruce said, "It's like this, Mr. Williams. I was afraid that there would be a traffic jam, so I came early." "Oh, then let's talk in the office," Eric said as he walked into Firefly's office building with Bruce. This was the office building that Robert Shea recommended a few months ago. It was now Firefly's property. The original New Line and Firefly employees had moved in at the beginning of the month. Eric had planned to let UTA move in as well, but when he proposed this suggestion, not only did Jeffrey and Robert object, but even Kapoor did not agree. After some explanation, Eric understood that it was to avoid suspicion. After all, a production company couldn't have an agency at the same time. Eric was originally just trying to get around the edges. If he didn't hide the fact that UTA and Firefly moved into the same office building, it would only bring him trouble. The two came to the office and sat down. Eric got someone to bring 2 cups of coffee and said to Bruce Joey Robin, who was sitting opposite him, "So, Mr. Robin, did you bring the script?" "Of course." Bruce took out the script from his bag and handed it to Eric. Eric did not say anything. He flipped open the script and looked down. Chapter 259. After reading the script, Eric found that there were many differences in details between this script and the film in his memory, but the main storyline remained the same. Therefore, he could easily modify these details when he filmed in the future. Most importantly, Eric didn't find the song Unrestrained Melody in the script. In his previous life, Ghost had become a classic largely because of the popular song, Unrestrained Melody. It could be said that the song was a sublimation of the whole story. If the interlude had been replaced with any other song, Ghost wouldn't have been as classic as it was in his previous life. Because of the butterfly effect, Eric was 100% sure that if he hadn't directed the script himself, Unrestrained Melody wouldn't have appeared again. Without this song, plus the various differences in other aspects, it would be a miracle if this script could achieve half of the success of his previous life. "Mr. Robin, I finished reading the script. Although there are many things that need to be modified, overall it's not bad. How much do you plan to sell this script for?" Eric closed the script and raised his head to ask. A trace of slyness flashed through Bruce's eyes behind his glasses. He didn't answer Eric's question, but asked, "Mr. Williams, what do you think needs to be modified?" Eric stared at Bruce and shook his head. "This depends on the specific situation of the shooting." Bruce didn't continue to ask after hearing Eric's words. He even felt that Eric had just said this to lower the price. He was confident that the script, which he had carefully modified many times, wouldn't be perfect, but it wouldn't need to be modified as much as Eric said. "Actually, it's like this, Mr. Williams," Bruce said. "At the party last night, I recommended my script to some people again. Many people were very interested in it. Mr. Charles Jaffe from Paramount also promised that if I sold the script to Paramount, Not only would he personally be the producer and fully support the shooting of the movie, but he would also let me be the co-producer and enjoy a share of the profits. Eric sneered in his heart and asked calmly, "Mr. Robin, how much profit is Paramount going to give you?" Bruce hesitated for a moment. He wanted to stretch out a few more fingers, but in the end he didn't dare to lie. He told the truth. In addition to the $300,000 remuneration for the script, Mr. Jaffe also promised me a 1% share of the North American profits. In that case, how much box office earnings do you think this script will bring in? Bruce revealed a proud smile and said, "Mr. Williams, since you have high hopes for this script, then I believe that the box office will reach at least $100 million, maybe even more." Eric said, "Look, even if you give it to another director, the box office sales will still reach $100 million. Based on the cost of the production, which is $20 million, and the publicity cost is $10 million. In the end, you will only get a share of $250,000, which is less than your basic remuneration." "Of course I know that." Bruce shrugged. "That's why I'm here today. Mr. Williams, how much are you going to ask for this script?" $500,000, Eric said. Of course, he wouldn't ask for too much at once. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to bargain. Bruce Joey Robin had a look of disbelief. He raised his voice and said, "Mr. Williams, is a script that can bring in more than $100 million worth of box office only worth $500,000 Mr. Robin, don't be so naive as to always say something like $100 million, okay? Before a movie is released, no one knows how much box office earnings it will bring in. So, tell me how much you want." Bruce stretched out 3 fingers and gestured at Eric. $3 million, and I've made 2 scripts into movies before, so I know what Hollywood's so-called profit share is. I don't want a share of the profits. I want a 1% share of the North American box office. Even though Eric was mentally prepared, he still didn't expect Bruce to ask for such an exorbitant price. Even he himself had never received such a remuneration. Back then, the lowest price for the script of Back to 17 was $200,000, without any share of the profits. After that, Home Alone and other movies. Although he was the investor, in order to avoid future wrangling and problems related to tax filing, his remuneration as a screenwriter and director were clearly stated in the contract. For example, for the recently released Island Horror, as the screenwriter, because the investment for Island Horror was only $5 million, he didn't receive the basic remuneration. Instead, he enjoyed a 3% share of the North American profits. According to the box office trend of Island Horror, this money was probably only about $1 million. Eric leaned back in the leather chair and shook his head with a smile. "Mr. Robin, the price you asked for is simply ridiculous. No screenwriter in Hollywood has ever received such treatment." No, there's one right in front of me." Bruce complimented Eric a little, then said, "Mr. Williams, compared to the profits this movie can bring, the price I asked for is not excessive at all, is it? Perhaps just the male lead of a movie can get much more than me." "You're wrong, Mr. Robin. I can't get that much. My income exposed in the newspaper is the final result after adding up my several identities as an investor, director, and screenwriter. If I were just a screenwriter, I wouldn't even get 1% of those figures. Mr. Williams, please give me a more sincere price." Bruce said, "You know, this script is like my child, so I hope there can be an excellent director to make it into a movie." Eric felt a wave of disdain in his heart. He hated those who always said that XXX was like their own child. Although some of them were sincere, most of them were just putting on an act. After hearing Bruce's exorbitant demand, Eric knew that the middle-aged man in front of him must be the latter. Otherwise, he should be talking to him about the content of the script, not how much money he wanted. "It's definitely impossible for a basic remuneration of $3 million and a share of the box office," Eric said. "You just said that Paramount is going to give you $300,000 for the script and a 1% share of the profits, so that's the price I can offer. Mr. Robin, I promise that my 1% is definitely more than Paramount's 1%. Bruce Joey Robin immediately shook his head. "Mr. Williams, you're too insincere." Eric wanted to show his sincerity. He was not a stingy person. However, with the greed of the middle-aged man in front of him, Eric knew that once he asked for too high a price, the other party would probably go to other film companies to ask for more sincerity, in the blink of an eye. "Mr. Robin, I'm already very sincere. I only got US $200,000 for my first script, without any share. Now you can still get a 1% share of the profits. To be honest, I just think your script is good. This is the first time I've tried an outsider's script. It's very risky. If I'm not careful, I might ruin my reputation. Maybe I should go to other film companies. I received a lot of business cards last night," Bruce said as he put the script back into his bag. Eric stretched out his hand and made a casual expression saying, "Go ahead, but I don't think anyone will offer a higher price. And even if you go back to Paramount, according to the production and publicity costs of the film, the box office will have to reach US $60 million to recoup the cost. I think the possibility of you getting that share is very low, because I don't think your script can get a high box office if it's directed by someone else. And once it fails, maybe no one will dare to accept your script in the future." Hearing Eric's words, Bruce Joey Robin hesitated for a moment, then got up and said goodbye to Eric. Eric turned his attention back to his work, and didn't think about the matter again after he saw the other party leave. Although Bruce Joey Robin was a bit greedy, he was a smart man. A smart man would definitely make a smart choice. Bruce Joey Robin might not have realized the meaning of his last words, but he would soon understand. Since the script failed, no one would dare to accept his future scripts. Correspondingly, if this script became a hit, then Bruce Joey Robin's future scripts would definitely be sold at sky-high prices. And the only one who could guarantee that the script would be a hit was Eric. It had to be said that Bruce Joey Robin was a very calm person. For the next week, he did not contact Eric again, and Eric did not hear any news about the script of Ghost. At the same time, after the second week of screening, the box office of Scary Island still reached 54 million yuan. Although it did not reverse the box office as expected, the box office drop of less than 5% was already beyond everyone's expectations. The total box office also accumulated to more than 52 million yuan, which was more than 10 times the production cost of the film. Originally, some of Disney's executives were worried that Michael Eisner might not be able to recoup the cost of publicity by stubbornly investing twice the cost of the film. However, after 2 weeks of screening, Disney had already recouped the publicity cost according to its own share. No matter how long Scary Island was screened, the share it received was pure profit. The other film companies were all envious of Disney's good luck. At the same time, they no longer criticized Michael Eisner for giving Firefly a high share of the profits. They even began to praise Michael Eisner's courage. Chapter 260. In the third week of November, with the arrival of Thanksgiving, a large number of Thanksgiving movies were released. Among them, the most anticipated was, of course, Home Alone 2, followed by Warner's Lethal Weapon 2 and Universal's Back to the Future 2. In addition to the most anticipated movies, there were also 7 or 8 movies that were scheduled to be released on November 17th. Of course, a movie that had a very weak presence was also quietly sandwiched among the other 7 or 8 movies. That was Steel Magnolias. Except for Eric, who was very confident in this movie, almost everyone regarded Steel Magnolias as a side project. Compared to Disney's emphasis on island horror, Steel Magnolias was no different from an adopted movie. In the third week of island horror, the number of screens had increased to 2,000, while Steel Magnolias only had 1,000 theaters. This was because Julia had acted in it. If Julia had acted in Steel Magnolias, according to the rules of the original Spacetime, it would have been good if the movie could get 500 screens. Because of this collective pessimism, Julia called Eric and scolded him. Her tone was full of complaints. Eric could only comfort the girl with kind words and various promises. Because The Kid 2 was shot in New York, Fox also held the premiere in a large theater on 42nd Avenue in Manhattan. After Eric negotiated with Fox, Fox readily agreed to broadcast the premiere of The Kid 2 Lost in New York. Compared to The Island, the premiere of The Kid 2 Lost in New York was more lively. After all, the first movie of this movie achieved a $300 million box office miracle in North America. There were only 2 movies in North American history that had achieved more than $300 million at the box office. Fox laid out a 50-meter-long red carpet outside the premiere theater and invited dozens of Hollywood stars to attend the premiere. Eric, I'm a little nervous. When the luxurious limousine drove to the entrance of the red carpet, Jennifer Aniston still held onto Eric's arm and stuttered. Eric could only pat the little girl to comfort her and said, "Okay, Jenny, relax. You're a big star now. In the future, you'll have to wait for the more grand Oscar red carpet. How can you be so timid for such a small scene? You make it sound so easy." Jennifer Aniston pinched Eric's arm and said, "Also, Eric, I'm cold." I can't help it. Your dress is already very conservative. You can take a look later. There are plenty of bare shoulders, bare backs, and bare thighs. I don't want to be like those women." When Jennifer Aniston heard Eric's words, she immediately pouted in dissatisfaction. Of course I'm here. Even if my baby doesn't take off her clothes, she's still more famous than those female stars. I don't want to rely on you, The girl stuttered and didn't say anything. In the end, she could only pinch Eric's arm fiercely. "It's all your fault. You insisted on giving me the role of Rachel. Don't think I didn't hear it. Once, Dad said that you plan to shoot 10 seasons of this TV series. In that case, I guess I can only be Rachel Green in the hearts of the audience forever. How many female stars begged for it?" Eric criticized in his heart, but he didn't hesitate to say, "Baby, as long as you don't want to shoot anymore, I'll immediately cut friends." Jennifer Aniston glared at Eric. "Am I such an insensible person?" No, my baby is the most considerate. Hey, the red carpet is here, let's get ready to get off." "Humph." The girl snorted, but quickly took out a small mirror from her bag and checked her makeup again. Eric just got off the car and walked to the premiere red carpet with Jennifer Aniston. The fans on both sides of the road made a deafening shout. Eric, I love you." A group of beautiful girls held the poster of Back to 17 and shouted loudly, Rachel, can you give me an autograph?" Obviously, the girl also had a lot of fans. Eric looked at the tight security on both sides and pushed Jennifer Aniston next to him and whispered, "Go and sign a few autographs for your fans." Jennifer Aniston experienced such a scene for the first time. Even though the temperature in New York had dropped below 10 degrees, Jennifer Aniston, who was wearing a thin dress, didn't feel cold. Instead, her cheeks were slightly hot because of excitement. This is the feeling of being famous, no wonder so many people like it. Thinking like this, hearing her boyfriend's reminder, Jennifer Aniston skillfully leaned against the wall of fans, took the pen and quickly scribbled on the notepads or posters that were extended to her. Eric also smiled and signed a few autographs for some fans, and also took a photo with the group of girls who shouted the most fiercely. After a short interaction, Eric once again held Jennifer Aniston and slowly walked forward. When they came to the reporter's interview area, Eric intimately held Jennifer Aniston and took a few photos together. Then they were stopped by a reporter standing in the middle of the red carpet. This was a reporter from Fox. Fox had agreed to broadcast the entire premiere of Home Alone 2 live. Of course, they wanted to maximize their profits, so they imitated the Oscars red carpet segment and arranged for a reporter to interview on the red carpet of the premiere. Under the jealous looks of the reporters who could only shout in vain, Fox's female reporter named Laura Pena invited Eric and Jennifer Aniston to the side alone. "Hi, Mr. Williams, Miss Jennifer Aniston, say hello to the audience." "Hello, everyone." Eric and Jennifer Aniston smiled and waved at the camera. "Speaking of which, Mr. Williams, this is your first public appearance with Miss Jennifer Aniston?" Under the girl's slightly resentful gaze, Eric confidently said, "Of course it's not the first time. We appeared together in the newspaper a long time ago. That was at the beginning of the year. That time when I came to New York, I was accidentally photographed. I still have that photo. Oh, I also know that time. You and Miss Jennifer Aniston are simply a match made in heaven," Laura Pena said with a smile. As for the rumors of Eric being a playboy, if Laura Pena didn't want to lose her job, she certainly wouldn't be stupid enough to mention this topic in this kind of situation. After all, Eric was still her boss. Thank you for saying so, Eric said with a smile. After chatting for a while, Laura Pena changed the topic to Home Alone 2. She didn't directly ask Eric, but instead put the microphone in front of Jennifer Aniston. Miss Jennifer Aniston, how much box office do you think Home Alone 2 will get? Of course, the more the better. The girl skillfully gave a jack-of-all-trades answer. Can you give me a specific number? Laura Pena asked. Chapter 261. Hearing Laura Pena's question, Jennifer Aniston glanced at Eric from the corner of her eyes. Seeing her boyfriend nonchalantly blinking twice, she leaned closer to the microphone and said, I saw the test screening of Kids in Charge too. This movie is even better than the first one. Young Stu's performance is still outstanding, Matthew is still so unlucky, and the other actors' performances are also very outstanding. Thus, I feel that this movie should be able to reach $200 million at the box office. Wow, $200 million, a shocking number. I hope Miss Jennifer Aniston's words can bring good luck to this movie. Laura Pena didn't have the slightest intention of comparing it to last year's Kids in Charge 2. She then asked, Oh right, Miss Jennifer Aniston. I heard that Matthew Perry, who plays the role of the young and stupid thief Marvin, was once your classmate, right? Jennifer Aniston nodded. Yes, last year when Eric was looking for an actor, he looked for a long time but couldn't find a suitable candidate for Marvin. Thus, I recommended Matthew to him. After a simple audition, Eric decided to let Matthew play the role. Later, it was proven that Eric's choice was correct. I didn't expect there to be such an interesting story. Laura Pena followed up with a teasing and mischievous tone. Then, Miss Jennifer Aniston, you introduced Matthew Perry to Mr. Williams. Aren't you afraid that he would be jealous? Jennifer Aniston heard this question and suddenly opened her eyes wide. She tightened her grip on Eric's arm and said, How could that be? If Eric was jealous, he wouldn't have chosen Matthew to play Marvin. After the short interview, the two walked through the red carpet and entered the theater together. After greeting the people who had already entered the theater, Eric moved closer to Jennifer Aniston's ear and suddenly said, Jenny, in fact, I'm very jealous. You have to consider compensating me tonight. Jennifer Aniston rolled her eyes at Eric. You've done so many messed up things that I'm about to die from anger, but you've never made it up to me. How about I make it up to you twice tonight? Eric said with a smirk, and reached out to hug Jennifer Aniston's waist. Jennifer Aniston felt an electric shock coming from her waist. She pushed Eric away and rebuked, You animal, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. After Jennifer Aniston said that, she really ran away from Eric. Not only did she deliberately walk towards Matthew Perry, but she even gave him a warm hug. Eric shrugged helplessly. Just as he was about to go over with Jennifer Aniston, Donald Topland, who had participated in the cameo, walked over with a smile and greeted Eric from afar. Donald was accompanied by a blonde woman who looked less than 30 years old. She was holding a little girl's hand. It was the little lowly Ivanka. Hi Eric, long time no see. Donald Topland walked over and hugged Eric warmly before introducing, Eric, this is my wife Ivana. Ivana, this is Eric Williams. Eric politely shook hands with Ivana Topland. At this moment, a clear lowly's voice sounded. Eric, do you still remember me? Of course, Innie. Eric smiled and reached out to pinch Ivanka's face. However, the little lowly strongly protested. Hey Eric, you're not allowed to pinch a girl's face. Eric squatted down in front of the little girl and asked with interest, Why can't I pinch it? Ivanka tilted her head and thought for a while. She couldn't find a suitable reason. Then she widened her eyes and said fiercely, In any case, you just can't pinch it. Eric was about to continue teasing the little lowly when Jennifer Aniston walked back. When she saw the little lowly Ivanka Topland, she immediately exclaimed in joy, Wow, what a beautiful little girl. She's just like Wawa. After saying that, without waiting for Ivanka to react, Jennifer Aniston reached out and pinched the little girl's face. Ayaya, you adults are so annoying. As the little lowly struggled like crazy, the few of them laughed. When Jennifer Aniston saw the little girl's strong reaction, she quickly let go of her hand and apologized to Ivanka's mother. "I'm sorry, did I do something wrong?" "It's nothing, Miss Jennifer Aniston. Annie is usually very obedient. It's just that she's a little resistant to unfamiliar people." Ivana smiled and explained. Friends was now a household name. Ivana knew Jennifer Aniston without any introduction. Jennifer Aniston still nodded apologetically and looked at Eric. Eric hurriedly introduced her. Then the four of them ignored the little lowly and started chatting. "Eric, what you said at the premiere of Shock Island at the beginning of the month was so domineering. I heard that the box office of this movie is already more than 50 million yuan. The production cost is only 5 million yuan, right?" "Yes, although the production cost is only 5 million yuan. The distribution cost is a little higher." Donald Toplin knew a little about the distribution of movies. He said, "Even so, Firefly will definitely make a lot of money." "Eric, how much do you think the box office of this movie will total?" Anyway, these figures were all analyzed in the newspapers. Eric didn't feel the need to keep it a secret. He replied, "A conservative estimate is $150 million in North America. It's hard to say overseas. However, the main overseas box office market is in Europe. With the halo of the Venice Silver Lion Award, and the quality of the movie itself is not bad, I think the overseas box office may be higher." Hearing Eric's words, Donald Toplin became more excited. According to Eric's calculation, this low-budget movie with a production cost of only 5 million yuan was estimated to bring Firefly 70 to 80 million yuan in profit. This didn't include the post-production video and other peripherals. The upcoming release of Home Alone 2 would definitely bring in more profits. Not to mention the other movies that Firefly is about to release. Eric can make at least 200 million yuan with these two movies alone. And this is all cash. Donald is now crazy about cash. Of course, Eric couldn't not notice the change in Donald Toplin's eyes. He sighed in his heart. Although they haven't been together for a long time, he has a good impression of this real estate tycoon. But after all, he is a very mature person. It is impossible for him to help because of personal feelings. Eric believes that even if Donald Toplin's best friend may give him some help, he will not invest a large amount of money in Donald Toplin's real estate project that may collapse at any time. In order not to let Donald Toplin hold on to his fantasy, Eric felt that it was better to make it clear. At this time, the staff informed the guests of the premiere that they could enter the screening hall. "Jenny, can you go to the screening hall with Mrs. Toplin first? I want to talk to Donald for a while," Eric said to Jennifer Aniston, not avoiding the Toplin family. Donald nodded to his wife. Ivana was about to take the little lowly and leave with Jennifer Aniston, but Ivanka broke free from her mother's hand and said seriously like a little adult, "Mom, you go first. I have something to discuss with Eric." Ivana keenly felt that her husband and Eric had something important to talk about. She pulled her daughter and said, "Annie, don't make a fuss. Come with me. Let's go see Kevin." "I'm not interested in that kid." Ivanka suddenly broke free from her mother's hand and hugged her father's leg like a little koala bear. No matter how hard her mother pulled, she wouldn't let go. In the end, it was Eric who said, "Mrs. Toplin, let Annie stay here. I don't have anything important to do." Perhaps realizing something, Donald Toplin picked up his daughter and nodded to his wife. When the people in the lounge were almost gone, Eric and Donald sat down on the sofa together. The little lowly was not in a hurry to speak. She blinked her beautiful big eyes and glanced between her father and Eric. Eric organized his words and said, "Donald, I've seen some information about your company." Donald Toplin smiled a little awkwardly and said self-deprecatingly, "It's a mess, right?" Eric shook his head honestly. "Of course not. According to the normal progress, the projects you are working on will be completed next year. Although the real estate industry is in a slump now, as long as those projects are completed and not left unfinished, I believe that with your ability, you will definitely be able to make a profit." Eric said and added, "This is not a compliment. I've seen your information. When you were still in college in the late 1960s, you operated an apartment project in Cincinnati, Ohio, and earned $1 million in a year. There was also the Grand Hyatt Hotel on 42nd Avenue in Manhattan, and the skating rink in Central Park. Donald Topland heard Eric mention some of his more proud past, and showed a little pride on his face. But soon he thought of his current situation, and couldn't help but sigh. Eric continued without waiting for Donald Topland to speak. But Donald, just as you need money to develop your business, I also need a lot of money to expand my film company. And even if I have extra money, it's useless compared to the needs of your real estate projects. Donald Topland knew that Eric was telling the truth. He nodded freely and said with a smile, I understand. The two men were silent for a moment. Eric suddenly asked, Donald, you should have been trying to raise funds during this time, right? Well, the bank group that loaned me a loan refused to provide me with any more funds. I could only find ways to raise funds from other places. I have contacted all the investors I could contact during this time. I also went to Japan through the introduction of a friend. Unfortunately, the Japanese's appetite was too big. They wanted to take over the whole project at a very low price. The price they offered was not enough to pay off my debt. Of course, I wouldn't agree. Eric thought for a moment and said, Donald, maybe you've been working in the wrong direction from the beginning. Chapter 262. When Donald heard Eric's words, an idea flashed through his mind, but he couldn't grasp it. He quickly asked, Eric, what are you referring to? Eric said, I'm saying that the direction of your financing should be wrong. Based on the information I've collected, in addition to other investors, the amount of money loaned to you by the bank alone is more than $1 billion. If your project stops working, the bank will suffer the most losses. So you should try your best to persuade the bank to continue to provide you with loans, instead of trying in vain to attract other investors in the current situation. When Donald Topland heard Eric's words, he was so excited that he almost jumped up. At the same time, he wanted to slap himself hard. In fact, it wasn't that he hadn't thought about it before. Otherwise, he wouldn't have tried his best to persuade the bank to allow him to postpone the annual high-interest payment. However, after the bank agreed to postpone the interest payment, Donald felt satisfied. Coupled with the repeated rejections from the bank, Donald changed the direction of his financing. Because of this wrong step, he had now wasted several months. Eric, I really don't know how to thank you. Donald Topland gratefully patted Eric's shoulder twice. He casually stuffed the little lowly who was sitting on his lap into Eric's arms. This is for you. Eric blankly caught the little lowly who was stunned by her father's sudden action. He thought that this was too precious. He had to coax and raise her. But Donald Topland immediately said, Eric, I'm sorry. I have to go back to the company immediately to gather people to discuss this matter. I've wasted 4 months. God, for whole months. I can't waste any more time. So can you help me bring Ivanka to her mother? Eric quickly nodded. Seeing Eric nod, Donald turned and left without looking back. A moment later, only Eric and the little lowly in his arms were left in the empty hall. Looking at the door that stopped shaking, Eric finally moved his eyes back and pinched Ivanka's face. He joked, Did you hear that, Innie? Your father gave you to me. Come back to Los Angeles with me. Eric's action of pinching her face immediately woke the little lowly up. She clenched her small fists and punched Eric a few times. She angrily said, Ah, how despicable. I already said you're not allowed to pinch my face. After the little lowly finished speaking, she struggled out of Eric's embrace and sat to the side. However, she continued to glare at Eric angrily. Her punches were weak, but Eric was still smiling. All right, Innie, let's go and find your mother. Ivanka subconsciously wanted to nod, but immediately thought of something, and said, Well, Eric, I still have something to discuss with you. Eric's interest was piqued and he asked, Tell me about it. I've recently started learning acting. I even joined the school's drama club. They all say that I'm improving very quickly. As if she thought of something she was proud of, the little lowly's face flushed red. She continued, Eric, Dad always says that you're a very good director. How about letting me act in your movie? Oh, that's not easy. Eric dragged his voice and said, Many people are fighting to act in my movie. You won't even let me pinch your face. Why should I agree? Of course, The little loli couldn't tell that Eric was joking. She widened her eyes and glared at Eric for a few seconds. Seeing that Eric had no intention of relenting, she hesitated for a while. Then, as if she had made up her mind, she closed her eyes and moved her face closer to Eric. She said softly, "Well, you're only allowed to pinch once. Don't use too much force." Eric looked at Ivanka's red face and felt a sense of guilt. He raised his hand and immediately put it down. He surrendered and said, "All right, you don't have to pinch. I promise you." Hearing that she didn't have to endure torture, Ivanka didn't have any intention of being polite to Eric. She moved aside and said coquettishly, "You just agreed. Don't go back on your word." "Of course." Eric nodded and said, "But if you want to act in a movie, you have to get your parents' permission." Ivanka immediately rolled her eyes at Eric. "You're so stupid. If they didn't agree, why would they send me to the acting class?" Eric thought about it. It seemed to be the case. In his previous life, Donald Trump didn't even object to his daughter becoming a model when she was 16, let alone an actress. The modeling circle was much more chaotic than Hollywood. However, she immediately started mocking him as soon as she got what she wanted. This sharp-tongued little loli was too much. Eric snorted. Just as he was thinking of an excuse to attack the little girl, the door to the screening room was suddenly pushed open. A man wearing a cinema staff uniform rushed in. When he saw Eric, he was relieved. "Mr. Williams, you're really here. The premiere will start in 2 minutes. Everyone is waiting for you." "Oh, I'll be right there," Eric said to the staff. He didn't have time to argue with the little loli. He stood up and said, "Let's go, Annie. Let's go watch the movie." Ivanka nodded and jumped off the sofa. She obediently held Eric's hand and followed him to the screening room. The McAllister family was about to leave for Christmas again. This time, even though Kevin wasn't left behind, he accidentally boarded a flight to New York. At the same time, the two stupid thieves, Harry and Marvin, also escaped from prison and arrived in New York. The two stopped stealing houses and set their sights on the toy town, which seemed easier to rob. After Kevin checked in at the Plaza Hotel, he went out for a stroll and got lost. He once again met the two stupid thieves in Duncan's toy town. Thus, a story that made people laugh once again began. To be honest, even though the plot of Kids 2, Lost in Tokyo was a lot richer, adding some side quests such as the strange pigeon keeper in the Central Park and the greedy waiter in the Plaza Hotel, there wasn't much innovation in the plot. But it wasn't like this sequel didn't have any changes. Compared to the first movie, which was completely aimed at children, this sequel added some adult elements. For example, at the beginning, Kevin quoted that obscure joke from his uncle, and the two conflicts between the clumsy thief and the modern girl, as well as the young clumsy thief Marvin's lines that made people laugh. These were all humorous scenes aimed at adults. But in any case, after the movie ended, Eric received warm applause and congratulations from many people. After attending the reception after the premiere, Eric drove Jennifer Aniston to Manhattan's Teplum residence. At this time, the mother and daughter were sitting together in the back seat. Because Donald Teplum left in a hurry and took the car with him, Eric reckoned that Donald Teplum, who was focused on how to make the bank continue paying, wouldn't send a car to pick up his wife and daughter. Eric had to personally send the mother and daughter back. "Sorry to trouble you, Mr. Williams." When the car arrived at Teplum's residence, Eric and Jennifer Aniston only went in for a moment before saying goodbye and leaving. Ivana Teplum personally sent the two people out. "It's nothing, Mrs. Teplum. If there's nothing else, we'll go back." Ivana Teplum was about to nod when Ivanka, who had been standing next to her, immediately pulled her mother's arm. "Mom, the movie." "Oh, this." Ivana Teplum looked at Eric awkwardly. She had a headache because of her youngest daughter's behavior. Eric looked at the little loli's expectant face and said, "Mrs. Teplum, if you and Donald agree, I will ask Annie to try if I need a young actress in a movie in the future." "Thank you so much, Mr. Williams," Ivana said. Ivana said. She was a model, and like many models, she had a natural inclination to be an actor. Donald Trumbull's performance was even stronger. If possible, the couple would not object to Ivanka appearing in Eric's movie, Because Jennifer Aniston was in a hurry to go back to Los Angeles to shoot the last few episodes of the first season of Friends, and Eric had a lot of things to do. The two left New York in a hurry the next day and returned to Los Angeles. After the premiere, Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, was officially released on November 17th. This time, because of the Thanksgiving period, many movies were strangling each other. Even with Fox's full publicity, Home Alone 2 did not have as good a reputation as Island Horror, which was released at the beginning of the month. The media's comments on the movie were very polarized. There were many who applauded the sequel, but there were also many who criticized it for being useless. The New York Post wrote about The Kid in Charge 2. Too many sequels suffer from déjà vu criticism. It's only because the fans love it so much and have such high expectations that it becomes even more. Cough cough. But Home Alone 2 is completely worthy of the fans' one-year wait. Although some people say that this is a copy without any improvements, the plot of this sequel is more rich and interesting than the first. As for the fact that it's a replica, that's unavoidable. Without Kevin pranking the two stupid thieves, would the kid in charge still be the kid in charge? Hollywood Online, on the other hand, strongly criticized the movie. The Kid in Charge 2 is a sequel movie made by Williams that has no sincerity at all. The plot is repetitive, and the plot is inexplicable and illogical. What's even more unbearable is that this movie aimed at children aged 6 to 12 is full of jokes that people can't bear to look at. I think this is definitely a mistake by the Film Rating Committee. The Kid in Charge 2 should at least be rated PG-13, not PG. Chapter 263. Although the reviews for Home Alone 2 were polarized, it did not stop the sequel from raking in the box office. In the first 3 days, Home Alone 2 earned $31 million in more than 2,200 theaters in North America. After the first week of release, the movie's total box office reached more than $46 million, far surpassing the first film's first week of more than $27 million. The other Hollywood studios were all scared that Home Alone 2 would break the box office record set by the first film. This week, Warner's Lethal Weapon 2 was in second place. Although it was released in more than 1,900 cinemas, it only earned a little more than $25 million at the box office, which was more than half of Home Alone 2. Paramount's black comedy Harlem's Nightclub ranked third, earning $22 million at the box office. Although Home Alone 2 earned $46 million at the box office, it wasn't too surprising. The most surprising movie in the first week of Thanksgiving was Steel Magnolias, which had been ignored by many. It was an exaggeration to say that it was ignored. After all, it was Julia's first movie after the success of Pretty Woman, so it still received a lot of attention. However, compared to the vigorous promotion of Kids in Charge 2, Lethal Weapon 2, and Back to the Future 2, the publicity for Julia's drama about the ordinary lives of several women in a southern town was much weaker. Therefore, although Steel Magnolias only earned $17 million in the first week and ranked fourth on the box office rankings, it was undoubtedly the biggest dark horse in the new year. This was because Steel Magnolias earned an astonishing US $17,000 per screen in the first week, and the attendance rate was frighteningly high. Home Alone 2 had an average of $20,000, which was higher than Steel Magnolias. Lethal Weapon 2 only earned $13,000, and Harlem Nightclub earned $10,000, which just reached the standard of a blockbuster. Then, under the impact of a large wave of new releases, the box office of Home Alone dropped 41% and earned $14.75 million, barely squeezing into the top 5. On the other hand, Universal's Back to the Future 2 only earned about $13 million at the box office. It wasn't because the movie suffered from a box office failure, but because for some unknown reason, Universal didn't release the movie on November 17th, or the following week on November 24th. Instead, they released it on November 22nd, which happened to be the day before Thanksgiving. Eric's head hurt when talking about Thanksgiving. While he received happy box office data every day, Eric's mansion in Beverly Hills was also in chaos. As an important holiday in the United States, Thanksgiving was a day for family reunion. Drew certainly did not go back to Culver to celebrate Thanksgiving with his mother. As for Aniston, her parents had reorganized their family after their divorce. She had half-brothers and half-brothers, and it was a mess. In addition, the little girl was already an adult. No matter where she went for Thanksgiving, she would feel very uncomfortable. Intentionally or unintentionally, she complained to Eric. Eric invited the girl to his house for Thanksgiving. He thought Jennifer Aniston would not agree, but she agreed this time. Therefore Eric, who was sitting in front of the computer in the study, had no mood to work at all. He felt very self-inflicted. If one of the two girls was like water and the other was like fire, then it would be fine. They could even neutralize each other. However, the two treasures were both of the fire attribute. The only thing that comforted Eric was that the two girls stopped fighting. After staring at the document for half an hour, Eric turned off the computer in boredom and walked out of the study. From afar, he heard a sound coming from downstairs. "Hey, big fat girl, how many times have I told you? This pillow is for my personal use. You are not allowed to touch it. You little bitch, if you call me fat girl again, I will touch it." After a short pause, Jennifer Aniston's horrified and disgusted voice immediately came. "Wow, that's so disgusting. You are actually touching your own saliva on the pillow. Why are you leaning on it? Go away, stay away from me. Aya, don't change the channel. Give me back the remote control. I am learning how to make pumpkin pie. Who dares to eat what you make? The salmon omelet you made yesterday was disgusting. Why did you eat so much? Don't think I didn't see it. I had a stomachache in the middle of the night." "Nonsense, Eric and I are fine." Eric hesitated a few steps. He sighed and turned back to the study. He picked up the phone and dialed a number one by one. Virginia went home to spend the holiday with her parents. Nicole was in Chicago, doing a promotional tour for Sleepless in Seattle. Even Julia was not in Los Angeles. In the end, out of boredom, Eric dialed Jeffrey's home number. "Hello, this is Hanson's house." After the call was connected, Eric was stunned because it was not Jeffrey's voice, but a young man's. Immediately, Eric thought that the other party might be Jeffrey's son, Chris Hansen. "I am Eric Williams, and you are?" Although he was 80% sure in his heart, Eric still asked. There was a pause on the other end of the phone, and then he said, "I am Chris Hansen. Mr. Williams, are you looking for my father? I will call him now." Eric didn't know the other party, so he didn't say anything. After a while, Jeffrey's voice came from the other end of the phone. "Eric, tomorrow is Thanksgiving. What's the matter? Let me say this first, Chris rarely comes back, and he even brought his girlfriend home, so I won't care no matter how big the matter is. If there's anything in the company, you can go to Robert." Eric was stunned, and then he smiled and said, "Nothing, it's just that I am a little bored at home, so I just called your number and wanted to talk to you." Jeffrey asked curiously, "Shouldn't Drew be at your house now? With that mischievous little girl around, will you still be bored?" "How should I put it, Jenny also came to my house. So you understand." Jeffrey certainly knew what Eric was talking about. He and Eric had seen the two little girls scratching each other in the hospital bed. After a pause, Jeffrey laughed and said, "Ha ha ha, Eric, why did you put them together again?" Chapter 264. Eric sighed. "It's hard to explain in a few words. Anyway, it all came together. I'm just glad that they didn't burn my house down these days." Jeffrey on the other end of the phone laughed again and said, "You must be having a hard time at home. It's almost dinner time. Why don't you come to my place for dinner and get to know Chris?" Eric was just bored and wanted to chat with someone. He didn't want to disturb Jeffrey's enjoyment. He asked hesitantly, "Is that appropriate?" "Why not? It's a holiday. Of course, the more people, the better. My place is so quiet all year round. It'll be even better if you come. By the way, if you want, you can bring the two girls with you." Eric thought that the two girls wouldn't quarrel in front of outsiders, so he agreed. "Then I'll go over now? Come quickly. If there's nothing else, I'm hanging up. The kitchen oven is still on." Jeffrey hung up without waiting for Eric's response. Eric put down the phone, went back to the bedroom, changed his clothes, and went downstairs. Drew and Jennifer Aniston, who were fighting for control of the TV, saw Eric coming downstairs in formal clothes and became vigilant at the same time. "Eric, where are you going?" the two girls asked in unison. Eric pretended to be unhappy and said, "You two are too noisy. I've decided to go somewhere else for Thanksgiving." "No." The two girls jumped up from the sofa together and walked to Eric's side in 2 or 3 steps. They firmly held his arms on both sides, and then stared at each other and said in unison, "It's all your fault." Eric rubbed his temples and said, "Okay, stop arguing. Jeffrey just called and invited me to his house for dinner. Who's going?" "Me," they said in unison again. "Okay, you have 10 minutes. Go change your clothes. I won't take you with me." There was a flurry of footsteps as Drew and Aniston disappeared around the corner of the stairs. Driving to Jeffrey's house, Eric pressed the doorbell, and the door quickly opened from the inside. A young man in a formal suit, who looked somewhat similar to Jeffrey but was much taller than Jeffrey, opened the door. He glanced at the 3 people outside the door and revealed a faint smile. He extended his hand and said, "Hello, Mr. Williams. Just call me Eric." Eric reached out and shook hands with the young man in front of him. "Nice to meet you too, Chris." Chris Hansen nodded at the 2 girls again. He took the red wine from Eric and said, "Please come in." The 3 of them followed Chris Hansen in. Jeffrey's house was still the same. No, it was cleaner than the last time Eric came. It was probably because his son had come back. It was the first time Drew and Jennifer Aniston came to Jeffrey's house. Seeing the apartment that was obviously not in line with Jeffrey's current wealth, the 2 girls were surprised. Jennifer Aniston could still hold back and not say anything, but the little girl was straightforward. She said directly, "Jeffrey is already so rich. Why is he still living here?" Eric turned around and glared at the little girl, warning her not to talk nonsense. Instead, Chris Hansen took the initiative to explain to Drew, "My father is a nostalgic person. He is reluctant to move out." "Oh." The little girl nodded gently, not daring to say anything. The 3 of them sat down in the living room. Jeffrey quickly came out of the kitchen with an apron around his waist. When he saw Eric and the other 2, he said, "Eric, you guys take a rest first. Dinner will be ready soon." "Do you need help?" Eric asked quickly. Jeffrey shook his head. No, Emily is enough to help me. You guys talk to Chris first." After saying that, Jeffrey went into the kitchen again. Chris Hansen smiled awkwardly and explained, "When I was 7 years old, I was fooling around in the kitchen and was scalded by hot oil. After that, my father never let me go near the kitchen again." Eric smiled to show that he understood. He gave the 2 girls a look, and the 2 of them obediently took the initiative to walk to the kitchen. Jeffrey's retreat came from the kitchen, and another pleasant female voice was surprised. Soon, the whispers quieted down. In the living room, the 2 men looked at each other and smiled. Eric had actually been observing Chris Hansen from the beginning. So far, he didn't find any aura of a top student in Chris Hansen. He didn't seem like a person who received a full scholarship for 4 years and worked at one of the 4 major investment banks, Morgan Stanley, as Jeffrey had occasionally said. Eric could only conclude that Chris was either a perfectionist or a bit inflexible from the meticulous details of his suit even in the room. Of course, the former was more likely. "Eric, what are you thinking about?" Chris suddenly asked. Since he was Jeffrey's son, Eric naturally felt a sense of closeness to Chris. He said frankly, "Jeffrey said that you work at Morgan Stanley. I was thinking, why don't you have the aura of the Wolf of Wall Street?" Chris was stunned for a moment, then he smiled and asked, "Eric, what do you think the so-called Wolf of Wall Street should be like?" Eric thought for a moment and said, "At least it should be full of aggression. But I think you look more like a meticulous researcher in some scientific research institute." Chris shook his head and said, "Eric, you're wrong. The more aggressive the so-called Wolf of Wall Street is, the less aggressive they look on the surface. You can look at the photos of some famous investment bank executives on Wall Street. Almost all of them look mediocre. You won't be able to find them in a crowd." This was the first time Eric heard this point of view. He asked, "Why do you do that?" "Because it's better to disguise, numb the enemy, and make them lose their vigilance." Eric nodded thoughtfully and said, By the way, Chris, what do you do for a living? Of course, I do whatever I can to make money. Eric smiled and asked, if Firefly wants to be listed, can I ask you? When Chris heard this question, the smile on his face disappeared. He said, Eric, I don't care if you're joking or not. If Firefly is really going to be listed on the market, you have to let me handle it. I'm sure you know how much Firefly means to me. I hope that it can develop well. Seeing how serious Chris was, Eric also nodded solemnly. Chapter 265. Seeing that Eric nodded, Chris let out a sigh of relief and said, But Eric, if you can make sure that Firefly can develop as fast as it is now, then it's best not to go on the market if you don't have to. Many companies will try their best to be privatized after being listed for many years. Although being listed can get a lot of financing, it also means more responsibility and risk. Take Hollywood, for example. Almost all the major film companies have been maliciously acquired. The most recent one was in 1984, when Disney was maliciously attacked by Saul Stan. In the end, Disney spent $325 million to redeem 1% of Stan's shares. At that time, Disney's market value was less than $2 billion. The $300 million in cash hurt Disney so much that they had to give up the family-style management and hire Michael Eisner as the company's helmsman. Speaking of this, Chris smiled and said, Of course, now it also proves that Disney made a very correct decision at that time. It can be considered a blessing in disguise. But not every company is so lucky. Firefly is developing so fast now. Once it's listed, it will attract more attention. Eric listened patiently and nodded from time to time. By the time Chris finished speaking, Eric had already made up his mind. He might as well never put Firefly on the market. Chris, do you think it's okay if Firefly is never listed? Of course, Chris said without thinking. Most companies are listed to get more development funds. In my opinion, Firefly is not short of money. Why should it be listed? As the two were chatting, Jeffrey came out of the kitchen and asked them to prepare for dinner. Eric also met Chris's girlfriend in the restaurant. Her name was Emily Brighton. She was tall, had blonde hair and blue eyes, and was dressed fashionably. Eric learned from her introduction that she was the vice president of a clothing company called Brighton. Based on the woman's surname and the name of the clothing company, as well as her age, she couldn't have started the company from scratch. Needless to say, she must be the daughter of the owner of the clothing company. Emily Brighton was more talkative than Chris. When she saw Eric, she screamed like a movie fan and said that she liked Eric's movies very much. At the dinner table, not only did she introduce the details of how she met Chris, but she also kept encouraging Jennifer Aniston to be the spokesperson of her company. Jennifer Aniston didn't know how to reject Emily Brighton's enthusiasm. She could only look at Eric for help. Although Xianya was still a TV actress, she had already become famous because of Friends. On the other hand, Emily Brighton's fashion company wasn't very famous. If Aniston went to endorse it, it would be beneath her status. Before Eric could speak, Chris noticed Aniston's embarrassment and took the initiative to help her out. Amy, can you eat quietly? Your company is too small. I think it's enough for you to have a second-tier celebrity as your spokesperson. Emily was unhappy when she heard this. She rebuked. It's all your fault. If you didn't mess up the listing, our company's 3 factories in Florida would have been built. Also, there's the $9 million order in Asia. How can you blame me? It's obviously your father who was too greedy and misreported the company's information. It's obviously you who found out. Emily looked like a hurt deer and rebuked. All companies do this when they're listed. Why can't we do it? Chris put down the knife and fork in his hand and raised his voice to refute. Don't you know how much your father misreported? Fortunately, I found out about it. If the SEC found out, your company would be bankrupt by now. When Emily heard the faint anger in Chris's voice, she shrunk her neck in guilt and muttered softly, My father changed it, but you still. Mr. Hawkridge vetoed it. Don't forget, you guys almost made him lose his job. It's good enough that he didn't pursue the matter. Eric, Drew and Jennifer Aniston, who were sitting on his left and right, looked at each other. It seems like they're arguing? Please don't break up on the spot. Otherwise, the three of them would be in big trouble today. Just as she was praying in her heart, Jeffrey, who was sitting at the head of the table, slowly coughed twice. Ahem, all right, stop arguing. Chris and Emily, who were already in the zone, immediately woke up when they heard Jeffrey's voice. They quickly closed their mouths. In order to calm the situation down, Eric took the initiative to start a conversation. The atmosphere of the dinner gradually became lively. After dinner, Emily pulled Jennifer Aniston and Drew into the room to talk. Only the three men were left in the living room. Eric said apologetically, "Sorry, Chris, just now at the table." "Eric, this has nothing to do with you. Don't take it to heart." Chris shook his head. Jeffrey also sighed and said softly, "It's good this way. We can quarrel occasionally. Actually, when Salina was here, the two of us often quarreled." "Dad, can we not talk about those things anymore?" "Okay, I won't talk about it." Jeffrey knew that his son was doing this for his own good, so he nodded. As they chatted, Eric gradually changed the topic to something he was more interested in. "Chris, are you familiar with foreign exchange trading?" "I know a little, but I've never been involved in such projects. I'm currently working in the securities department." "Then do you know how to speculate in foreign exchange? For example, the yen. Isn't the yen rising a lot now?" Chris shook his head. "The yen has doubled now. Even if you have the money, you won't be able to make much money." Eric was stunned. He regretted not paying more attention to the history of the Japanese economy in his previous life. After hearing what Chris said, he could only give up. However, another huge opportunity had yet to come. Eric said, "Then, what about rubles? Do you know anything about rubles in the Soviet Union?" Chris advised, "Eric, I think it's better for you to focus on making movies. Not everyone can afford to play in the foreign exchange market. Take the yen for example. Although the yen has doubled over the past few years, the international hot money hasn't made as much profit in the foreign exchange market as you think. The federal government only used the yen to make Japanese goods lose their competitiveness in international trade. Japanese domestic capital and companies fled in large numbers, which eventually led to the Japanese economic bubble bursting and economic stagnation." "Well, I mean, haven't you realized that the Soviet Union is going to collapse soon?" Chris shrugged. "It's possible, but who knows when the Soviet Union will collapse? Even if the Soviet Union's economy collapses, this country has a mandatory foreign exchange ratio for rubles. That's why we can't interfere." "Well, have you ever thought about the possibility that the Soviet Union will collapse and capitalism will be restored? At that time, because of the economic turmoil, the rubles will definitely plummet. That will be a good opportunity, right?" Chris and Jeffrey looked at each other, and then at Eric. After a while, Chris laughed. "Eric, if you tell the world about this idea, it will be welcomed by the whole world. If the Soviet Union really collapses, everyone will not have to worry about the threat of nuclear war. The Big Ivan, who blew up the Arctic Circle in the past, had scared the whole world." Eric was a little helpless. Although the upheavals in Eastern Europe had happened, and East and West Germany had been unified in August this year, there were still about 2 years before the collapse of the Soviet Union in his memory. Coupled with the half-century-long competition between the United States and the Soviet Union, although the Soviet Union had been repeatedly vilified, its strength was unquestionable. Few people would have thought that such a big country would collapse in just a few months. "Then let's assume," Eric continued, "if it's possible, the Soviet Union will collapse, and the rubles will depreciate greatly. At that time, if I take out $1 billion to invest in the rubles and use hundreds of times the leverage, can I increase this amount by dozens of times?" Jeffrey did not respond, but Chris looked at Eric as if he was an idiot. "Let's not talk about 1 billion. Even if you take out 10 billion, if you dare to use more than 100 times the leverage, you might lose it in a few minutes in the violent financial turmoil you mentioned." Eric was stunned. Okay, I don't know much about this." Chris knew that Eric did not even go to university and was just an ordinary high school graduate, so he patiently explained, "Let's take the 100 times leverage you mentioned. If you invest $1 billion, then you can expand this amount to $100 billion for foreign exchange transactions. But your $1 billion is only equivalent to 1% of $100 billion, which means that you can only withstand the rise and fall of the foreign exchange by 1%. Even if the overall trend of a currency is falling, because of the game between the buyer and the seller, there will be violent fluctuations in the process. As long as the currency rises more than 1% at a certain stage, your money, whether it's 1 billion or 10 billion, will immediately be liquidated. Under normal circumstances, the leverage used in the foreign exchange market is about 20 to 30 times. Occasionally, someone will take the risk and use 50 times the leverage. Okay. Eric smiled awkwardly and shrugged. Pretend I didn't say anything. Chris and Jeffrey laughed when they saw Eric's awkward expression. Chris added, the more violent the financial turmoil, the lower the leverage used to ensure the safety of the funds. If you really come across a good opportunity, you can take $1 billion and double it. Since he could not play with foreign exchange, Eric felt that it was better to invest in a field that he was more familiar with. What he was most familiar with, other than movies, was the fastest developing IT industry in the next 20 years. The big software companies did not have a chance. The internet was not developed yet, and the various network companies did not have the opportunity. In terms of hardware, Eric had been thinking about Apple for a long time. Unfortunately, Boss Chow's future was uncertain, and Apple was not on the verge of bankruptcy. What else was there? After pondering for a while, a name flashed. Cisco. Cisco. Eric slapped his forehead and almost jumped in joy. In his previous life, Cisco was a giant with a market value of $500 billion. Chapter 266. Chris, do you know about Cisco? Eric asked excitedly. In his memory, Cisco might not have been listed yet, so with his current wealth he could definitely buy a large amount of shares. Eric didn't even ask for too much. Even if he only got 10%, 10 years later, the value of these shares would be enough for him to taste what it was like to be the richest man in the world. Chris thought for a moment and asked, you mean the router company that Sequoia Capital invested in and incubated? Yes, you know about Cisco too? Eric asked nervously. Chris knowing about this company didn't seem to be good news. Could it be Chris didn't see Eric's uneasiness and said with a strange smile, of course I know. Our company is also in charge of Cisco's listing. He happens to be in the same department as us, but not in the same group. His name is George Kelly. That guy spent a few months persuading the major shareholders of Cisco to agree to the IPO plan. Now he's lobbying everywhere, hoping that some investment institutions will take over Cisco's shares when it goes public in February next year. That means it hasn't been listed yet. Eric breathed a sigh of relief. When he heard that Chris was familiar with Cisco, he thought that the company had already been listed, or that it had been targeted by a big investment bank like Morgan Stanley. If that was the case, it wouldn't be easy for him to snatch food from the tiger's mouth. Chris, can you do me a favor? Eric thought for a moment, then looked at Chris seriously and said, help me buy Cisco's shares. Buy as many as you can. Chris was puzzled. Eric, now some investment institutions are hiding from George Kelly. Many people don't think this company will do well. Jeffrey, who had been listening quietly, said, Eric, if you want to invest, you can ask Chris to help you find some valuable companies. This Cisco you're talking about, I think it's better to forget about it. Eric shook his head firmly and continued to look at Chris. Chris, can you do me a favor? Chris seemed to be affected by Eric's gaze. He nodded subconsciously and then said, Eric, if you are interested in this company, I can help you ask George Kelly for more detailed information. You'd better read it before you decide. There's no need. I've already decided. Chris and Jeffrey looked at each other. Jeffrey whispered, Eric, did you drink a little too much? Listen, Jeffrey and Chris. I'm very sober now. I'm not drunk or drunk. Well, actually, I've seen some information about Cisco before, and I think this company might become a giant in the industry like Microsoft, Oracle, or Apple. So Chris, can you give me some good advice? Chris looked at his father. He knew that Jeffrey was most familiar with Eric. Jeffrey thought about Eric's character in the past. It seemed that he had never successfully dissuaded Eric from doing something he had decided to do. So Jeffrey nodded to his son. After getting his father's confirmation, Chris said, "Then, Eric, if you decide, it's best to set up an investment company or find an investment company to act as your agent. Morgan Stanley has a private wealth management department. With your current wealth, you will definitely receive the best service. Of course, you will also have to pay a high commission. So I recommend the former option. Then, it's very simple. Use this investment company to acquire Cisco's shares. Then, find a professional manager to join Cisco's board of directors and help you with the acquisition of the shares. Of course, you can do this yourself, but I don't think you have the time, and I don't recommend you do these professional things yourself." Eric thought for a moment and looked at Chris, who was sitting across from him. He suddenly said, "Chris, why don't you help me manage this investment company?" "Me?" Chris pointed at himself. Eric nodded. "Yes. Don't worry. This company will not be small. I promise the company's funds will not be less than $100 million US. Chris knew Eric would not joke about this kind of thing. He was suddenly in a dilemma. He is now a senior manager in Morgan Stanley. Many people in the investment bank need at least 7 to 8 years to get to this level. He only used 4 years. Also, he is likely to be promoted again after 1 more year. Now an opportunity suddenly appeared in front of him. If the person who asked him this was not Eric, but someone else, he might agree immediately. But Eric is too young. This made him hesitate. He was afraid that Eric was acting on a whim. "I know what you are worried about, Chris. But believe me, this is not a whim decision. I promise you. If you don't believe me," Eric looked at Jeffrey and said, "Jeffrey can testify." Jeffrey touched his nose and smiled. "What do you want me to guarantee? I promise that I am not acting on a whim. You should know my character." "But from what I remember, you did a lot of things on a whim," Jeffrey said, amidst Eric's gloominess. He then added with a smile, "But it turned out that you were right. Chris, I think you can give it a try." Chris pondered for a moment and said, "Eric, I need to think about this. I will give you an answer as soon as possible." "No problem." Eric nodded and did not rush him. It was not until 10 o'clock in the evening that Eric took the initiative to leave Jeffrey's house with the 2 girls. The chaotic Thanksgiving quickly passed. Because of the dispute, none of the 3 people got to eat the turkey. The 2 girls fooled around and went beyond the President of the United States to pardon the 2 turkeys they each bought. After the holiday, Jennifer Aniston started work and left the villa. Eric breathed a sigh of relief. While paying attention to the box office of the 3 movies related to Firefly, the casting of The X-Files began. After 2 months of busy work, the writing team had basically completed the script for the first season of The X-Files. At Disney's headquarters, the assistant knocked on the door a few times and opened it. He said to the busy Michael Eisner, "Mr. Eisner, Mr. Robin is here. Let him in." Michael Eisner put down the pen in his hand. Bruce Joey Robin quickly walked into the office. He had been living a very good life these days because the news that Eric had taken a fancy to the script of Ghost had spread throughout Hollywood. He had met almost all the executives of the 7 major companies. There were also countless small film companies that wanted to cooperate with him. The price of the people who wanted to get the script was getting higher and higher, but it did not meet his expectations. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Robin." Michael Eisner walked around the desk and shook hands with Bruce Joey Robin with a smile. Bruce also didn't feel as surprised as when he met the 7 senior executives not long ago. After shaking hands with Michael Eisner in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing, the 2 sat on the sofa together. Michael Eisner didn't make any comments on the script of Ghost, and said, "Mr. Robin, I've already read the script. I invited you here today because I want to ask you something." "Mr. Eisner, please tell me what you want to know." Bruce took a sip of the coffee that his assistant had brought over. Michael Eisner patiently looked at Bruce's pretense. When he put down the coffee cup, he asked, "I just want to know one thing. When you were talking to Eric Williams, what did he say? If your answer satisfies me, I will give you a very suitable price." Bruce Joey Robin frowned. Michael Eisner's commanding tone made him very uncomfortable. Mr. Eisner, Mr. Williams said that he was very optimistic about the script and wanted to buy it and direct it himself. Michael Eisner shook his head. No, I am very familiar with that little guy. He would never say such a thing. I need you to restore the scene of your meeting with him. If you continue to lie, or if you don't want to say it, you can leave now. If you tell me the whole situation and the result satisfies me, I will give you a very generous screenwriting contract. I know that the highest offer is from Paramount. They offered you $600,000 and a 2% share of the profits. Trust me, my offer is definitely higher than theirs. Let's see if I'm satisfied with your answer. Bruce was unhappy and almost wanted to leave. However, he would not refuse money. After thinking about it, he endured it and roughly described the situation of his meeting with Eric. Michael Eisner listened patiently. Of course, he knew that Bruce would not tell the truth word for word. It was inevitable that he would embellish it. Therefore, he was also judging that Bruce's words were exaggerated. After Bruce finished, Michael Eisner leaned on the sofa and thought for 10 minutes. It all started at the celebration party for the box office success of Shock on a Small Island. The party was held by Disney, and most of the people at the party were from Disney. Therefore, Michael Eisner had already learned the whole story from many people in detail. What he could determine at the moment was that Eric did not take the initiative to approach the group of people at the party. Instead, he happened to pass by and was surrounded by the group of guests. Only then did he hear about the script. At the time, they only exchanged a few words. There was a general manager of Disney's distribution department in the group. According to him, Eric did not act strangely at the time. Therefore, the possibility that Eric was very optimistic about the script when he heard a few people talking about it was ruled out. Chapter 267. If this possibility was eliminated, the quality of the script would be lowered. Then Eric left the group. Bruce chased after him and described the outline of the script to Eric. After listening, Eric only left a business card and asked Bruce to go to the company the next day to discuss the details. Then it was certain that Eric was interested in this script. However, there were too many scripts that Eric was interested in. He had asked Drew Barrymore, that little girl, to buy the copyrights. Although he thought that he had done it quietly, everyone knew that scripts were actually the least valuable. There were at least 8,000 scripts produced in Hollywood every year, and only a few hundred of them could be made into movies. Therefore, what Michael Eisner wanted to confirm was whether Eric would personally direct the script. So far, 3 of Eric's movies had already been completed, and the box office in North America had all exceeded $200 million. With the first week's box office of $46 million, it was only a matter of time before the box office of Home Alone 2 exceeded $200 million. In this case, the next movie that Eric decided to shoot, unless the other party decided to go for the Oscars route, the box office would definitely not be less than $100 million. It might even be another movie that could reach $200 million. Michael Eisner had personally read the script of Ghost, and it definitely had nothing to do with an indie film. Bruce, are you sure that during the discussion with Eric, he said that he wanted to personally direct the script? Bruce was a little annoyed that Michael Eisner had taken a long time to think about it, but he still nodded and said, "Yes, Williams said that he wanted to personally direct the script." Of course, Bruce ignored Eric's emphasis on the different results between him and someone else, because this would hinder Bruce's negotiation with other film companies. In fact, Bruce already had another plan in mind. As long as other film companies could give him a satisfactory price, he didn't have to sell the script to Eric. As long as it was stated in the contract that the other party had to let Eric be the director, it would be fine. As for how those big companies would invite Eric, it wasn't something that he should worry about. After thinking for a moment, Michael Eisner finally made a decision. $1 million plus a 3% share of the North American profits. Mr. Robin, this is Disney's final offer. There's no room for negotiation. I don't believe that any other movie company will offer a higher price. So if you agree, we can draft the contract immediately. If you don't agree, you can leave now. The corner of Bruce Joey Robin's mouth twitched. He quickly calculated in his heart. This price had actually reached his psychological expectations. After all, a few weeks ago, he was just trying to find a way to sell the script. Now, $1 million plus a 3% share of the profits had far exceeded his initial psychological expectations. As for the conditions of $3 million and a share of the box office in Eric's office, that was just for bargaining. Moreover, Michael Eisner sitting opposite him seemed to be tougher than he thought. He knew that the other party wasn't joking. His bargaining wouldn't yield much result. In this case, Bruce quickly made a decision. Mr. Eisner, I can sell the script to Disney at the price you said, but I have a condition. Please say it. Michael Eisner simply made a gesture of invitation. Bruce Joey Robin said, I want Eric Williams to be the director of this movie. Michael Eisner's expression changed slightly. He knew that the effect of a movie made by different people would be very different. Therefore, he originally wanted to buy the script and co-produce the movie with Eric in the future. Otherwise, he wouldn't have offered such a high price to Bruce. I can agree to this condition. Michael Eisner pretended to think and then nodded. No, I haven't finished yet. Bruce showed a sly smile and said, I'll sell the script to Disney at the price you just said. Disney has to pay me $1 million first, and then there's a 3-month deadline. If Disney can't confirm Eric as the director within 3 months, the contract will be void. As for the deposit of $1 million, I can only refund 50% to Disney at most. Michael Eisner's face darkened. Don't you think this is too ridiculous? Bruce shook his head. Of course not. I'm taking a big risk. If you can't invite Eric Williams to be the director, then the contract will be void. Outsiders will definitely be able to guess our conditions. If I want Eric Williams to be the director of this movie, I won't get any benefits at all. How can I be sure that you won't secretly leak the news to Eric Williams? Michael Eisner asked. Bruce said in surprise, How is that possible, Mr. Eisner? Even if the news is leaked, it's more likely to be leaked by Disney. If I leak it, I'll lose at least $1 million. This money is nothing to Disney, but it's a huge sum of money to me. Michael thought about what he might have to do next, and then said, 3 months is too short. At least a year. Half a year at most. A year is too long. It's not long at all. Since you're a Hollywood screenwriter, you should know that there are many scripts that take 10 or 8 years to make into a movie. So a year. After a year, even if Disney doesn't succeed, the value of your script won't depreciate. So only a year. Bruce lowered his head and thought for a while. Okay, a year it is. Then I'll get someone to draft the contract. Michael Eisner stood up, picked up the internal phone on his desk and said a few words. A few hours later, the contract for the script was signed. After sending Bruce Joey Robin away, Michael Eisner took a car to a villa in Malibu. It was already afternoon. A few people had already arrived in the villa. If one was familiar with Hollywood, one would recognize them at a glance. These people were the leaders of the 7 major companies. Hi Barry, long time no see. Michael Eisner walked up to Barry Diller first and greeted him warmly. Yeah, everyone is very busy. I can't even remember the last time we met, Barry Diller said with a smile. Michael Eisner greeted the CEO of Warner Brothers, Steve Ross, and the CEO of Universal, Sid Simberg. Then he found a seat beside Barry Diller. Soon, the CEO of Columbia Pictures, which was acquired by Sony not long ago, Peter Guber, also arrived at the villa. Then the CEO of Paramount, Frank Mancuso, arrived. So far, 6 of the CEOs of the 7 major film companies had arrived. The leaders of the major film companies all knew each other. Most of them had worked together before. Therefore, even if they were competitors, they still looked friendly on the surface. After chatting for a while, Michael Eisner's assistant hurried in and whispered a few words in Michael Eisner's ear. After the assistant left, Barry Diller asked, Is the one from MGM not coming? Michael Eisner nodded. Sigh, actually it doesn't matter whether he comes or not. He can't make any decisions. Everything is decided by that bastard, Kirk Kerkorian. It's a waste of time for him to come. Frank Mancuso, the CEO of Paramount, said, A few months ago, that bastard Kirk wanted to invite me to preside over MGM. But now whoever takes over that mess is unlucky. As the leaders of the major film companies, the people present more or less had some feelings for movies. When they heard Frank Mancuso say this, they all sighed and thought about how glorious MGM was in the past. In that case, let's begin, Michael Eisner said. He was the one who had facilitated this gathering. When they heard Michael Eisner say this, the remaining 5 people stood up and walked to a conference room that had been prepared beforehand. They sat down at the conference table. An assistant came in and distributed the prepared information to the few people present. Then he quietly closed the door of the conference room and left. Everyone take a look. We can't let Firefly continue like this. Michael Eisner said. This was the information about Firefly that he had gotten someone to organize. In fact, this data was available to the other film companies, but Michael Eisner couldn't let them prepare their own food. The room was silent for a long time. Steve Ross, the CEO of Time Warner, was the first to close the information in his hands. The others also finished reading the information one by one. Then they looked at each other. They all knew that Firefly was already a huge threat to the Big Seven. These people also had the information on the document, but they hadn't put it together. Now that the results of Firefly this year were placed in front of these people, the impact on these people at the helm was imaginable. I can't believe that Firefly's profits this year have already exceeded half of the total profits of the Big Seven, Steve Ross said with emotion. Frank Mancuso of Paramount shrugged and looked meaningfully at his former boss, Barry Diller. He said in a hoodlum manner, Martin Davis wants to meddle in everything, but he doesn't know the business at all. Paramount's profits this year are negligible. Maybe next year will be a loss. Universal's CEO rubbed the plastic cover of the folder and looked at Michael Eisner. Island Horror and Steel Magnolias combined can probably get more than $200 million at the box office. Disney is also a winner. Michael, what do you plan to do? Michael Eisner could hear the jealousy in Sid Simberg's words. He said, Disney didn't earn much. Williams only gave us the rights to distribute the film. Disney doesn't have the rights to the videotape and television broadcast. Then you can earn at least 40 to 50 million, Steve Ross said. Stop arguing. Don't forget what we are here to discuss today. Barry Diller interrupted the conversation. Then the 5 of them looked at Barry Diller together. Everyone knew that Fox was Firefly's closest collaborator. Not only did they have the rights to distribute the 3 movies directed by Eric, but they also had the rights to the videotapes and other peripherals. There was also Fox's friends. Barry Diller, of course, could understand the meaning in these people's eyes. He said in a low voice, If you think it's inappropriate for me to be here, then I can leave. But if that's the case, then there's no point in today's gathering. After Barry Diller finished speaking, he glanced around coldly. When no one said anything, he continued, Let's not talk about the past. You must have seen this week's box office data. For the week of November 17th to November 23rd, the total box office in North America was about 130 million, but the 3 movies related to Firefly accounted for more than 70 million, more than half of the total. If we continue to let Firefly continue to expand like this, you should be able to imagine what will happen to the 7 conventions. Worldwide, Sid Simberg said, Before Firefly acquired the new line, I specifically told you not to let Firefly complete this acquisition. But the fact is, this acquisition was completed without any resistance. None of you made a move to stop it. Now that they have the new line, Firefly also has a distribution channel. Even if their overseas distribution is still extremely weak, as long as Firefly continues to earn huge profits in the country, it's only a matter of time before they expand their overseas distribution channels. So, what do you think we should do now? Everyone was obviously silent for a short while. Barry Diller looked at Michael Eisner, who organized this gathering. Michael, since you're the one who organized this gathering, you must have some ideas in mind, right? Michael Eisner nodded. Now, it's not possible for us to stop Firefly's development. So, we can only try our best to get a stake in it. Since we can't destroy it, we'll try our best to control it. Heh, if only it were as easy as you say. I think everyone here has already discussed this with Firefly, right? Columbia's CEO Peter Guber, who had been silent all this while, said, "Of course. So, normal means definitely won't work. In that case, we can only use some extreme means." Michael Eisner said faintly, "This requires us to join forces and work together to succeed." "What about MGM?" Frank Mancuso asked worriedly. "Kirk Caron is not a fool. After we work together, MGM will definitely catch up." Chapter 268. The heads of the major companies in the conference room had all climbed up from the bottom of Hollywood, so they were very familiar with the tricks of Hollywood. After a few hours of discussion, a series of strategies against Firefly and Eric were formulated. The 6 CEOs even divided the benefits that each company would receive after Eric gave in. After Thanksgiving, Eric entered the last busy period of the year. In the plan, as long as he finished this month, Eric could rest for a long time starting in late December. Drew was even thinking about whether the two of them should go on a holiday during Christmas. Eric had been at Fox's audition for the lead role of The X-Files all morning. Since The X-Files received far more attention than in his previous life, the selection of the male and female leads that would support the entire series was also very careful. Because of the success of Friends, the competition for the male and female leads of The X-Files led by Eric was very fierce. Several famous actors who had not been very successful in Hollywood in the past 2 years had participated in the audition. Although the audition had entered the second round, the selection of the male lead had not been completed in the morning, and none of the auditionees could satisfy Eric. Moreover, Eric did not consider the two in his previous life, because in the original version, no matter what kind of mood the male lead, David Duchovny, was in, the faintly discernible smile at the corner of his mouth would never disappear, giving people a feeling that he was out of character. Therefore, Eric did not intend to give him this role from the beginning. In his previous life, the producer chose David Duchovny as the male lead mainly because his salary was very low. As for the female lead, Gillian Anderson, she was even less in line with Eric's expectations, not to mention that she had not yet debuted. The female lead of The X-Files, Dana Scarlett, was supposed to be a woman with a high IQ who graduated from the University of Maryland, had a degree in physics and law, and was a teacher in the FBI. However, the petite Gillian Anderson did not have the temperament that a woman with a high IQ should have in the show. Instead, she was more like the little secretary of the male lead, Fox Muller. In Eric's imagination, the actress playing the role of Dana Scarlett should be tall and slender, with a shrewd and capable temperament. It would be best if she had a cold and elegant aura. It would be best if this character could be on par with the male lead in the drama, and not be a vassal of the male lead. After having lunch in Century City, Eric could only leave the afternoon audition to the two producers, because he had to return to Firefly headquarters to attend the first annual meeting after the merger of Firefly and New Line. "I'm really sorry, Carolyn. There was a traffic jam on the way here." Eric hurriedly pushed open the door to his office and apologized to the brown-haired woman in her 40s. This woman's name was Carolyn Elliott. She had opened an accounting firm that was quite famous in the industry. Firefly and Eric's personal finances had always been outsourced to Carolyn Elliott's firm. Seeing that Eric was in a hurry, Carolyn, who had been waiting for a long time and indeed had some resentment in her heart, could only chuckle and say, "It's okay, Eric. I just got here not long ago." Eric did not go to his desk. Instead, he sat down on the sofa opposite Carolyn and said, "Carolyn, have you sorted out my personal financial information?" Carolyn took out the prepared information from her bag and placed it on her lap. She raised her head and asked, "Eric now?" Eric looked at his watch. There were still more than 20 minutes before the meeting at 2:30 in the afternoon. He thought that it should be enough to hear about his financial situation, so he nodded. Carolyn flipped open the information and began to report. "Eric, your main income this year comes from a few movies. Among them, Home Alone received $120 million. Fox bought the overseas distribution rights and earned $24 million. In addition, Home Alone received a total of $32 million from the videotape and TV broadcast rights for the second half of the year. Home Alone currently has a total income of $176 million. Although Carolyn Elliott had read through the data many times, and the data had been personally compiled by her, she still felt as though she had lived her entire life in vain when she read it out loud in front of this young man who wasn't even 20 years old yet. After a brief moment of sighing and being distracted, Carolyn Elliott quickly turned her attention to the information and continued to read. Because Firefly and New Line will only achieve a financial merger next year, the box office share of all the movies released by Firefly this year will still belong to you. The global box office share of Pretty Woman is $102 million. Currently, the videotape and TV broadcast rights have only earned $19 million, for a total of $121 million. In addition, the global box office of Dark War is $88 million. Currently, there is no videotape share. The advertising share of Friends is $29 million. These two sums of money have not been received yet. According to the contract, Columbia and Fox will complete the payment before December 31st. In addition to these main box office earnings, Firefly's advertising department has a total income of $18 million through the advertising placements of Pretty Woman, Dark War, Home Alone 2, and Sleepless in Seattle. In addition, of the other two companies you own, Pixar Studios' profits are $0, and UTA's share is $9.3 million. At this point, Carolyn Elliott paused for a moment. She looked at Eric and said seriously, "Eric, compared to the movies, I don't think UTA can generate much profit for you. So, I personally suggest that you sell the shares of this agency as soon as possible. Otherwise, it may cause you trouble." Eric nodded. In the past 6 months, he had gradually discovered this problem. Although he owned 90% of UTA's shares, it did not mean that 90% of UTA's artists' commissions were his. The company could only get a small part of the 10% commission from the artists. Most of it still went to the artists' direct agents. Therefore, even though Kapoor only held 10% of UTA's shares, if one only counted the income of the management company, Kapoor, who had the management contracts of Al Pacino, Julia Roberts, and several other A-list celebrities, earned no less than Eric. It should be known that managers didn't just take a cut of the film's salary. They also took a cut of the actor's income from endorsements and other channels. In addition, in order to avoid suspicion, Eric could no longer interfere in any of UTA's affairs. Therefore, this part of the shares was dispensable to him and could be transferred out at any time. "I'll think about it, Carolyn. Continue." Carolyn Elliott continued reading. In summary, your income this year is $441 million, of which two payments totaling $117 million have not been received. Next is the expenditure. Firefly has participated in the production of a total of 7 movies this year. The expenditure for Dark War is $0, and the other 6 include various personnel dividends. The total cost is $84 million. The acquisition of Pixar Studios and the subsequent investment totaled $30 million. The acquisition of New Line cost $60 million, and the acquisition of Fox's shares cost $80 million. In addition, the construction of the manor in Malibu totaled $27 million. Your personal credit card account covers several large expenses, totaling $14 million. Also, Carolyn Elliott looked at Eric strangely and said, "Also, Miss Barrymore's credit card expenses totaled $56 million. The total expenditure is $309 million. Eric, before Columbia and Fox pay the other 2 payments, you only have $15 million at your disposal. And even if these 2 payments are received, you can't use them as you wish. Because even after some reasonable tax avoidance, you still have to pay $140 million in taxes this year." The reason Eric had specially asked Carolyn to help him sort out his financial situation was to prepare for the upcoming investment company. After a few days of consideration, Chris Hansen had already agreed. According to the information collected by Chris, when Cisco went public, its share price would be $18, and its total market value would only be $224 million. Eric knew that this would be the only time he would get Cisco's shares at such a low price. After Cisco went public, its share price would soar. At that time, even if he wanted to buy it, the investment companies would not be willing to sell their shares. Therefore, Eric naturally wanted to get as many shares as possible this time. But now, he realized that his remaining funds were not even enough to pay taxes. Carolyn, can you apply for an extension of the tax payment? Eric asked tentatively. He just happened to know of a way to extend the tax payment by half a year. If it could be delayed until the second half of next year, then the profits from the movies released at the end of the year would definitely be in his account, and his financial situation would be very relaxed. Carolyn shook her head. Eric, whether it's Firefly or your personal financial situation, it's very simple. There's no way to get an extension from the IRS through financial means. If you wanted to get an extension from the beginning, you should have informed me at least half a year ago. It's too late now. Eric smiled bitterly and said, looks like I'll have to take a loan again. Oh right, Carolyn, what do you think of Firefly? Carolyn was puzzled. What are you talking about? You should know that after the merger with New Line, we can no longer outsource our finances to your firm after this year. Carolyn Elliott's heart sank. Firefly was her biggest client. If she lost this client, her firm's income would drop by at least half. However, Carolyn suddenly realized that Eric's words had a hidden meaning. Eric, are you saying that you want to? Yes. Eric smiled and nodded. I want to invite you to Firefly to be the CFO. Although by doing so, you will have no choice but to close down your firm. But I'm sure you'll realize that Firefly is worth it. Chapter 269. I need a few months to finish the business I have now. Carolyn had almost no hesitation. As Eric said, everyone could see Firefly's current development potential. Between the boss of a small accounting firm and the financial director of a large company, a smart person would know which one to choose. Of course, no problem. Eric said. Several departments in the company were now operated by Robert's subordinates. Eric did not have a suitable person, so he did not say anything. However, Eric had to pay more attention to the company's financial affairs. It was the best choice to put Carolyn Elliott, who he was familiar with, in this position. As for Robert Shea, Eric believed that as long as he was smart enough, he would not oppose his decision. The two people chatted for a while, and then walked to the office together under the staff's notice. The meeting was not long. The issues discussed were roughly the financial problems of Firefly and New Line, as well as the development plan for next year. When Carolyn Elliott reported the financial affairs of Firefly, Robert Shea's face was very interesting. This was because New Line had released 6 or 7 films, including Nightmare on Street 5, this year, but the total income was less than a fraction of the first Home Alone. And according to the previous contract, although Robert Shea had 15% of Firefly's shares, he could only listen to Carolyn read out the profit data, but he could not get a penny from it. During this period, Eric also announced that he would appoint Carolyn Elliott as the company's financial director. Although Robert Shea could not hide his displeasure, he did not refute. The meeting was held for the whole afternoon. After it was over, Eric stopped Robert Shea, who was about to leave, and asked, Robert, how is the preparation for the release of the Golden Jade League videotape? I have customized the first batch of 100,000 videotapes. Eric, do you really think that the Golden Jade League can rely on the influence of Sleepless in Seattle to sell again? Robert Shea asked doubtfully. Eric nodded affirmatively. Of course, Robert. 100,000 boxes is too little. We need at least 300,000 boxes for the first batch. Try to pay attention to this. Robert Shea shook his head like a rattledrum. Eric, this is too risky. I think 100,000 boxes is more than enough, and we've already spent 1 million. We'll definitely have to fork out a sum of money for publicity in the future. If the videotape really sells well, we can get the factory to rush it. What if we can't make it in time? Eric asked. Robert, trust me. Make 300,000 boxes and distribute them. Tell those distributors that they can sell first and pay later. We must ensure that all the channels we can reach have the videotape of Golden Jade League. Robert was still a little hesitant. In his opinion, an old movie from more than 30 years ago, after being stimulated by Sleepless in Seattle, being able to sell 100,000 boxes was already very good. However, Eric directly asked him to produce 300,000 boxes and use such a sales method. In Robert's opinion, this was no different from throwing money into the water. Eric thought for a while and said, "Robert, listen to me this time, okay? If I'm proven to be wrong, then I won't interfere with anything in the company's operation for a year." Robert was immediately moved when he heard Eric's words. What he was most afraid of was that Eric would interfere with the company's operation. Due to the age prejudice, Robert didn't think that Eric had any talent in running a film company. He only had his current wealth and status because of the continuous success of several movies. In this case, he should honestly make movies instead of making irresponsible remarks about the company's operation. However, what made him helpless was that Eric owned 85% of the company's shares. With Eric's promise, even if it was just verbal, Robert Shea felt that he could take a gamble. The cost of 300,000 boxes of videotapes was only $3 million. In Robert's opinion, it was worth it in exchange for his absolute control of Firefly for a year. "Okay, Eric, I will implement your plan as soon as possible." Eric watched Robert Shea leave and smiled, thinking that this method might be able to continue, using such a bait to drive Robert to do things according to his will. After packing up, Eric left the office and prepared to drive home. Just as he walked out of the office building, a brown-haired white woman in her 30s walked over and stopped him. When Eric stopped, the woman eagerly introduced herself. "Mr. Williams, I'm Sharisa Cody. Do you remember me? We've met before." Eric had almost forgotten about Sharisa Cody, whom he had met once in New York. However, it was impossible for him not to recognize the man behind this woman, Brad Pitt. However, compared to Sharisa Cody's eagerness, Pitt looked a lot more awkward. It seemed that he was definitely against his agent taking the initiative to come to him. "Hello, Ms. Cody, we meet again." Eric smiled and shook hands with the other party. He felt that this matter was quite interesting. He originally thought that he would never see Brad Pitt again after that incident. Sharisa Cody saw that Eric remembered her, and a smile appeared on her face. He had to admit that this woman took good care of herself. Eric was not sure how old she was. "Mr. Williams, do you still remember your original invitation? I've already joined UTA with my team." Eric recalled for a moment, and remembered that there was indeed such a thing. When he saw Sharisa taking the initiative to bring Brad Pitt to apologize, he felt that this woman was very good at dealing with people, so he said it casually. However, Eric looked at the two people in front of him and asked, "When did this happen?" "A week ago," Sharisa replied. After seeing that Eric did not show any other expression, the woman quickly said, "Mr. Williams, can I invite you to dinner?" Eric looked at Sharisa Cody, then glanced at Brad Pitt, who was forcing a polite smile behind the woman. He quickly remembered the purpose of the other party's visit. "Ms. Cody, did Mr. Pitt participate in the audition for the male lead of the X-Files?" Sharisa Cody smiled awkwardly when she saw that Eric had exposed the matter. Then she said, "Mr. Williams, Brad participated in the audition this afternoon. Unfortunately, you weren't there in the afternoon. That's why I came here personally to talk to you." "All right then." Eric glanced at Brad Pitt behind the woman. "Mr. Pitt, you don't have to go. Go back and wait for the news." When Brad Pitt heard this, his expression suddenly became a little awkward. Sharisa Cody realized that Eric still did not like Brad behind her, so she could only give the man standing behind her a look. Then, "I'll go back first." Brad Pitt finally spoke. "Mr. Williams, bye-bye." Eric only nodded slightly at the other party. After Brad Pitt drove away alone, Eric opened his car door and said to Sharisa Cody, "Ms. Cody, please get in the car." "Oh, thank you." The woman quickly got into the passenger seat. In a restaurant, after ordering, Sharisa Cody said impatiently, "Mr. Williams, Pitt's acting is actually very good. If you don't believe me, you can go and watch the video of Pitt's audition for The X-Files. He just hasn't encountered any good opportunities." Eric certainly knew that Brad Pitt's acting was very good. The other party had received more acting awards and nominations than Tom Cruise. However, so what? There were countless people with excellent acting skills in Hollywood who could not make a name for themselves, but there were only so many opportunities. However, looking at the woman in front of him, a playful smile appeared at the corners of Eric's mouth. "Miss Cody, do you only have one actor, Brad Pitt, under you?" Sherisa Cody did not know why Eric suddenly asked this, but she still shook her head and said, "No, there are 4 or 5 more." Eric shrugged. "Oh, then you're really good to Brad." Sherisa Cody's face suddenly turned slightly red. Of course, she could hear Eric's words. However, the matter of the agent and the actors under her was actually not that hard to talk about. She had also heard that a 40 or 50-year-old music producer had personally brought a 12-year-old girl to fame, and even trained her to become his wife. The girl seemed to be called Celine or something. After adjusting her state of mind, Sherisa Cody said with a faint pleading tone, "Mr. Williams, can you give Pitt a chance? He definitely won't let you down." Eric looked at the woman in front of him and quickly calculated in his mind. With this hard-working agent helping Brad Pitt, although the other party was already 26 years old, male actors, especially handsome ones, had a relatively long shelf life. Brad Pitt was very likely to make a name for himself in Hollywood sooner or later. This was something that Eric was very unwilling to see. Since that was the case, giving the male lead role of the X-Files to Brad Pitt would only be bad for him and not good for him. This was because the X-Files was the same as Friends in that it was a TV series with very fixed characters. After acting for 8 to 10 seasons, it was almost impossible for the actors to change their on-screen image. The possibility of them returning to the big screen was even slimmer. In his previous life, of the 6 main leads of Friends, only Jennifer Aniston had successfully transitioned to the big screen. Moreover, Jennifer Aniston had paid a very high price in order to transition to the big screen and not let the audience think of Rachel Green. Many of the roles that Jennifer Aniston had received were very bad. Although he had made the decision in his heart, Eric was still quite kind. After thinking for a while, he directly reminded Sherisa Cody, "Miss Cody, you have to think carefully. Once Mr. Pitt takes the role of the male lead of the X-Files, his on-screen image is very likely to be fixed. It will be very difficult for him to transition in the future, because the male lead of this TV series has to sign a contract for at least 5 seasons. Chapter 270. Hearing Eric's words, Sherisa Cody hesitated for a moment. However, she soon realized that her hesitation was laughable. She was very clear about Brad Pitt's current situation. In the past 6 months, Brad could only occasionally play small roles in some movies or TV series. Under such circumstances, as long as he could get the role of the male lead in a blockbuster TV series, there was nothing to worry about. Many second-tier and third-tier Hollywood stars were participating in the competition for the male and female lead roles in the X-Files. After thinking this through, Sherisa Cody said, "Mr. Williams, I believe that the X-Files is definitely a very excellent TV series. If you can play the male lead in this TV series, it doesn't matter even if it's fixed." This woman really knows how to talk, Eric thought. However, Sherisa Cody continued, "However, Mr. Williams, isn't it a little too long to sign a 5-season contract in one go?" Eric immediately shook his head and said in a tone that left no room for negotiation, "It's not long at all. The 6 lead actors of Friends have all signed a 5-season contract." Sherisa Cody didn't know if Eric was telling the truth. If that was the case, she really couldn't find any reason to bargain. Moreover, even if it was a few more seasons, it seemed that she and Pitt didn't have the qualifications and chips to bargain, let alone 5 seasons. Eric observed Sherisa Cody's expression and said, "If you don't have any objections, I'll go take a look at Brad Pitt's audition tape tomorrow. If his performance can satisfy me, I'll inform you to sign the contract." The next day, Eric went to the set where Fox was in charge of the audition. He found Brad Pitt's audition tape and watched it several times. After confirming that Brad Pitt's current acting skills were indeed suitable for the role of Fox Mulder, he found the producers of Fox and Firefly to discuss it, and quickly decided. What was left was the female lead, and some other supporting roles. Of course, Eric didn't care about those supporting roles. He just put some energy into selecting the female lead. At the same time, another variety show promised to Fox was finally launched. After considering for a long time, Eric finally chose the safest variety show, Who Will Become a Millionaire. In his previous life, this show originated from the UK. It became popular all over the world when it first appeared in the late 90s. Eric remembered that there were many similar shows on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. Until Eric transmigrated. Who Will Become a Millionaire still hadn't left the television screen. There were often rumors of another millionaire appearing in this program in a certain country. Who Will Become a Millionaire grasped the psychology of ordinary people wanting to get rich, so it was not limited by any era. Unlike some other programs, although they might be successful in the present, it was much more troublesome to operate. Who Will Become a Millionaire was much simpler, and it was very popular. Anyone could sign up for it. Therefore, after writing the proposal, Eric first sent people to many countries around the world that paid attention to intellectual property protection to register the copyright of the show. Once the show became popular, he believed that he could make a lot of money just by selling the copyright. Hey Eric, what do you think of this question? In Home Alone, how many brothers and sisters does Kevin have in total? In the car driving to Malibu, Drew, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, held a small hardcover notebook in her hand. She would write and draw on it from time to time. Ever since she knew about Eric's plan for Who Will Become a Millionaire, the little girl was very enthusiastic about thinking about all kinds of strange questions. She even hoped that Eric would use the questions she collected in the show. When Eric heard the little girl's question, he smiled and shook his head. No, I already said that the design questions must be related to life, and it must be very interesting. Your question is completely testing people's memory. Who would be so free as to care about how many brothers and sisters Kevin has? Drew pouted and retorted. Then the question you designed is even more boring. Who would be so free as to care about how insects breathe? Eric helplessly stared at the little girl. It's obvious that you didn't pay attention at all when you were in school. This question must be in the biology textbook. You're quibbling. Only nerds care about these questions. The little girl shook her curly hair and bit the ballpoint pen in her hand for a while. Then she asked, "What about this one? When did the Hollywood sign appear?" Eric nodded and said, "This is a good question. Write it down, write it down." Hee. The little girl smiled proudly and wrote it down in a small notebook. Eric thought for a while, then looked at the little girl and asked, "By the way, I really don't know when the Hollywood sign was set up. What year was it?" The little girl rolled her eyes at Eric and said confidently, "How would I know?" Eric was a little speechless. He asked, "Then how did you come up with this question?" "I just happened to pass by there yesterday." The little girl pondered for a while with the ballpoint pen under her chin. Then she looked up at the road in front of her and asked, "How far is it?" Eric looked out the car window and said, "We'll be there in 5 minutes." The car drove on the highway for a while before stopping outside the manor in the corner of Malibu. Eric opened the door and got out of the car. However, he heard the little girl screaming in the car. Yeah, Eric, I knocked my knee. Hurry up and carry me out. Climb out yourself." Eric thought that the little girl was up to mischief again. He ignored her and walked straight to Frank Gehry and his private lawyer, Edward, who were waiting at the entrance of the manor. "Wow, Eric, you're so cruel." Eric was just about to reach out his hand to Frank Gehry, who was enthusiastically welcoming him when a small body jumped on his back. Eric reprimanded, "Stop fooling around. Can't you see that there are so many people here? If you make any more mischief, I'll stuff you into the trunk." "I really knocked my knee. It's red. Take a look if you don't believe me," the little girl behind him said aggrievedly. Eric scooped up the little girl hanging on his back and held her in his arms. He looked at the little girl's white and tender calf that was exposed under her knee-length pleated skirt. Although there was indeed a small bruise on it, it was neither bleeding nor swollen. "You won't limp. You'll be fine after running for 2 kilometers. With that said, Eric wanted to put down Drew. The little girl giggled and fooled around with her arms around his neck for a while before reluctantly letting go. Just as Eric let go of Drew, He sensed someone looking in his direction from the corner of his eye. He looked in the direction of his intuition, but he didn't see anyone. He thought that he might be a little paranoid. For some reason, he had been feeling uneasy over the past few days, as though he was being followed. Perhaps I should hire a team of bodyguards, Eric thought to himself. Soon, he focused his attention on the few people in front of him. I'm really sorry. Drew always likes to fool around. Eric knocked the little girl on the head before shaking hands with Frank Gehry, Edward Lewis, and the others. At the same time, he nodded at the assistants beside them. It's okay. Frank Gehry chuckled. Edward Lewis echoed. Then let's go in. I've been looking at the design plans. After waiting for more than half a year, this place is finally built. Eric's eager look made Frank and the others laugh. Please follow me, Frank said as he gestured for everyone to get into the car. The manor's door was opened by the temporary guards. The group drove straight to the mansion by the cliff. As for the other buildings in the manor, Eric wasn't in the mood to check them one by one. It was fine as long as they passed the inspection. After all, these buildings were where the manor's staff and guests would live in the future. The few cars drove along a curved cement corridor all the way to the main building on the cliff that Eric called Freedom City. The group got out of the car. Eric looked at the shell-shaped silver building in front of him that was even more exquisite and magnificent than the one in his mind. He couldn't help but exclaim. The Iron Man Malibu mansion in his memory was completely CG, but it was only a concrete building. However, although the building in front of him inevitably used some reinforced concrete, most of the main structure was built with granite, special glass, and low-alloy high-hardness steel. The surface of the spiral shell-shaped building was covered with a silver titanium alloy material that shone brightly under the sun. Originally, Frank Gehry had estimated that the manor's construction budget would only be $5 million. However, with Eric's promise of unlimited funds, Frank Gehry increased the budget again, and again like a god shooting a movie. First, it was raised to $10 million, and finally, it was raised to $20 million. At the last moment of completion, he applied for another $2 million budget from Eric. And of the entire manor, 90% of the money was spent on this building. In this day and age, $20 million was enough to build a 20-story building. And now, the housing prices in the entire Malibu city were far from the tens of millions of dollars it would be 20 years later. Most of the villas in Malibu were only worth a few $100,000. Mansions with private beaches and other facilities were only worth a few million. The group of 6 stood outside the silver building for a few minutes, carefully examining the appearance of the entire building. Finally, Frank Gehry said with a smug tone, "Well, I think we should go in and take a look. I believe the internal structure will be even more shocking." The staff opened the door of the villa, and Frank Gehry led the group in. When they walked into the living room, the first thing that attracted everyone's attention was not the spacious living room in front of them, but the sparkling blue sea outside the glass window at the end of the living room. Wow, it's so beautiful. The men still maintained their restraint and modesty, but the girl didn't care about that. She cheered and jumped toward the floor-to-ceiling window that was more than 10 meters long and more than 2 meters high. Eric, come and take a look." Drew leaned on the glass window without any scruples and looked at the sea outside. Eric didn't go over. Looking at the girl's body leaning on the glass like a little gecko, he asked worriedly, "Mr. Gehry, there shouldn't be a problem with the hardness of the glass, right?" "Of course not," Frank Gehry said confidently. "This is a special glass. Although it looks no different from ordinary glass, this kind of glass actually has 3 layers. In the middle is a layer of polycarbonate material. Even if it gets shot, as long as it's not a large caliber sniper rifle, it can block it. Of course, if it's shot directly by a gun, it will definitely crack the glass. When that happens, it can only be replaced in one piece. But ordinary impact won't cause any impact at all." When Edward's assistant heard Frank Gehry say that, he said in surprise, "Mr. Gehry, according to what you said, isn't this bulletproof glass? It should be very expensive, right?" Frank Gehry shook his head and said honestly, "Although it's not at the level of bulletproof glass, it's almost there. As for the price, isn't $20 million spent on these things?" Eric, Shall I give everyone a tour? That would be great. When Eric heard Frank Gary's words, he ignored the girl who was leaning on the glass and looking at the sea view. He followed Frank Gary to the other parts of the villa. As Frank Gary walked, he introduced, "This floor is mainly the living room, kitchen, fitness room, and reception room. According to the design drafts you gave us, Eric, the basement is a studio. There are a total of 8 bedrooms on the second and third floors, as well as a storage room, a study, a small screening room, and so on. In addition, there are a total of 12 bathrooms in the villa." Eric nodded gently and walked up the spiral staircase to the second floor. As he listened to Frank Gary's introduction, he looked around. Then everyone went to the top floor. It was a spacious master bedroom that allowed them to look around. Through the surrounding glass windows, they could see Malibu City, the distant Santa Monica Mountain, and the sea to the south. It was a 360-degree panoramic view. Looking at the scenery outside the window, Eric suddenly thought of a problem, a very serious problem. "Mr. Gary, are these glass windows single-sided?" "Of course. How could I miss such an important detail? All the glass windows in this building have been specially treated. Even at night, although you can see light from the outside, it's impossible to see anything inside." "That's good." Eric felt relieved. Otherwise, it would be terrible if someone were to look through the windows with binoculars. After spending more than 10 minutes walking around the entire villa, the group returned to the living room. But the girl was nowhere to be seen. "I believe Miss Barrymore must have gone to the swimming pool outside," Frank Gary said with a smile. "It just so happens that the scenery there is pretty good. Let's go there to discuss matters." After passing through a side door beside the living room, the few of them came to an open-air swimming pool that faced a cliff. Although the indoor view was also very good, there was a layer of glass after all. There was no obstruction here. Facing the faint sea breeze, looking at the blue sky and white clouds, and the boundless sea surface, they immediately felt like they were in a vast sea. "Mr. Gary, can I swim now?" The girl's voice came from behind a deck chair. Only then did everyone realize that the girl had found a pair of sunglasses from somewhere, and was lying on the deck chair, sunbathing. "Of course, Miss Barrymore." Frank Gary seemed to like the girl a lot as he said with a chuckle, "But we have to wait for Mr. Williams to sign the project acceptance contract." You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.